Just trying to check if I'm getting sound on my feed. Trying to see. Yeah, there we go. So start the streaming. Okay. It's always obnoxious to start the streams for these sometimes. But yeah, how's it going?
Not bad. Just I listened to again there this morning, prepping breakfast.
Nice. Yeah, I guess we'll give some people a moment to show up, and then we can start discussing it.
I think there should be a few. I saw PP was in on it and a few others, so I think it might not be too bad a turnout.
Yeah, no. Well, we'll see. I'll push out the invites. You guys want to like it and share the room and all that stuff. How's it going, OG?
I'm good. How are you?
Oh, good enough. Just Monday. Not too bad of a Monday, but just a Monday.
Oh my God, Zink, you should see the amount of snow we got here. Like 3 feet between snowing and drifting. It's crazy.
It was snowy this morning. I don't think there's any left on the ground now. But there was a slight bit of snow this morning. It was dusted.
Zink, is your mom going to be joining us?
Do you try to behave? This is my sole effort at unity and all that bullshit. Otherwise, whatever. But yeah, no. So there's enough of us here now. So you're all new to it. So I mean, it's pretty straightforward. I mean, just tell it. Start off with what you think about it, and we go from there. Does anybody want to start with their initial thoughts?
I think it reminded me a lot of. I actually went back and rewatched the Alex Jones documentary on it as well. Just because it kind of rehashed some memories and between the New York tunnels and what I've learned about the old cult stuff before. A lot of it, made some sense, and at the end, it wrapped it up quite nicely. On the fact that not many people acknowledge it, but it's pretty legitimately happening.
So I mean, that's the thing. I mean, yeah, the parallels here, because this is what I've read it a few times over the years, and then of course with the recent news. But yeah, no, I guess. Do you have any other thoughts on it? Because we all just kind of go around, then we eventually kind of pick on a angle, and then we can just beat the hell out of it. That's pretty much the way these things go. So I don't know if anybody else has initial thoughts on the story. It doesn't even have to be on the political aspect or anything else. Like just like your perception of it and all that other stuff.
This won't be a like a well put together thought, but I thought it's kind of fucked up the way they describe I can't remember his name, but the main perpetrator initially, this corpulent outcast who was fallen from grace and ostracized by his elite pals, and then he undertakes. Just gonna assume it's these blood rituals are referencing in the church, and they this fucking pool of children's blood in the basement, and yeah, I don't know, that definitely pulled my old adrenochrome lever. And then the description of him becoming more presentable, his hair darkening, the weight shedding off, and and then marries into upper society and throws this big soiree at his home. I thought that was a pretty interesting parallel. I don't know politically mostly, but kind of the come from behind and out of nowhere fresh behind the ears kid, like, I don't know, Barack Obama. And then fast forward, and yeah, that kind of stuck with me, banged around in my head a bit.
Hey Zink, I read the synopsis that you posted there. So this is a book that's 100 years old about some kids and some tunnels.
It's about 100 years old. Yeah, it's a story. It's not really a book. It's just a story.
Right. So what do we know about the author?
Oh well, he's written lots of stuff. H.P. Lovecraft is famous horror and science fiction writer from about 100 years ago.
Yeah, I found another author that, like, writes science fiction, but it's clearly based on historical facts. He just kind of, fills in the gaps and then writes these stories. Is it kind of like that? Is he based on anything, or is it completely made up?
Yes and no. The guy was well read. He was actually, I mean, he was actually a bit of a shut-in. He did live briefly in New York, strangely enough, with his Jewish wife, but he was kind of a classic waspy guy of that era. And he was not super fond of the mass immigration going on in New York. He hated his time there. Story is sort of the product of that. Um, yeah, he's a curious fellow. He was a lucid dreamer, that much I can tell you. Um, and a fairly well read guy. Funny enough, actually, one of his more interesting things that you might get a kick out of. He has like a he was fascinated with Quebec, right? Because he mostly grew up in New England, Rhode Island, New York, but he went on a trip one time to Quebec City, and so he wrote like a travel log, but he wrote it like in 18th century English, and it's really weird. But yeah, he was quite well read and well written.
Yeah, I think that's very relevant. So was he living around Brooklyn by any chance? Do
I
you know?
believe so. I believe he lived out in that part.
Oh, well. You know, I mean, being married into a Jewish family, there's certain things that he couldn't say, but he may have been exposed to what, you know, some of the stuff that's coming to light today.
Well, and he was a police officer watching the immigrants on the street and just kind of hovering in the shadows, absorbing
Well, no,
information.
the main character, not Lovecraft, but the main character. So that's what we're talking about too. Yeah. So the main character of this. So yeah, no, I would definitely say to read it, Unum. Because it gets into certain details here. Now, I still want to go around the table and see people's perceptions here. But the interesting thing he describes, and it's something I've always perceived about these ghettos. I mean, essentially, there's another way to describe these ghettos, right? He's like, yeah, you have weird youths that don't really seem to have a job, and what jobs they do seem to have, and they're involved in crime, right? Like pretty much everything he describes here, and then they seem to be being mass imported. This is the important part here, is he describes that they seem to be brought here by agents that are unclear for nefarious purposes and all that stuff. Now it goes in a slightly supernatural sort of um angle there, just because that's his deal, but it sort of makes you wonder. But just
Well, he touches on the recruiting, right? Is that what you mean when you're saying there's supernatural explanation for why they're here?
yeah, but yeah, they are being actively recruited, in their third world shithole countries, right? And told to come here with promises of great wealth and all that stuff, right?
Well, am I imagining this, or does he explicitly or kind of implicitly state that they're brought here, under this like promise through the occult of some, like, I know the wealth and everlasting glory. You won't be in the shithole we're taking you from, but we're gonna bring you to this, you know, land of milk and honey and give you eternal life.
I don't know if it's about eternal life, but yeah, it's under the idea that yeah, it'll be a reign of a new age and stuff like that, right? Kind of like yeah, an earth shattering sort of like uprising, like pretty much. No, he's not a Christian. He is very much an atheist, but like it's a theme within his stuff, right? Like a pretty much like a dark, a malicious cult filled dark age that may be knocking at the doorstep type thing, right? Now that seems to get perverted at the end of the story, um, for now. Right? but it's always waiting there, and that's a common sort of theme within his stories. So yeah, I don't know if anybody else has any other initial thoughts before we start digging in on it.
Yeah, I guess I had a little bit of thought on, like when he was actually dreaming and when the psychologist told him he was dreaming, but he was legitimately seeing and hearing shit. Maybe that's the idea to keep you guessing a little bit or keep you in the dark, but it seemed like the dreams conflicted the actual scenarios a bit. But, knowing what we know today, uh, in my opinion, they weren't actually dreams.
Well, that's the thing. You have to understand what Lovecraft's kind of beliefs around dreaming were, right? He was a lucid dreamer. He was an active dreamer. Um, and so yeah, when it ends there and he comes out of the dream, there are manifestations of the reality of that dream, right? The bones of you'll find out if you come to enough of these book spaces that I'm awful with names of Soydam. The bones of the old man Soydam are sitting there in that little hovel with where Malone fell through. But so there's almost implicit that there's kind of almost two realities to this, right? Yes, it was a dream, but yes, it was real, and yes, it has manifestations on the real world, right? Because it's just his bones, right? Something obviously happened with all this stuff, um, and and that sort of ordeal there, right?
Gotcha.
So does anybody else have any other initial thoughts?
I don't have any initial thoughts. I missed the first session. I'll listen a bit. I might miss part of it, but is this like an EPUB thing, or is this like published online for free?
Oh yeah. No, you could. Like I said, it's out of the public domain. It's in the public domain, so you can actually go on Spotify. If you go to the original tweet for this, if you look up Gulag Book Club there, and I'll even just go and stick it back up in the nest.
Wait, you got a Spotify?
What?
You got a Spotify?
No. I'm saying it's read for free on Spotify. Like in the original tweet for this, there was a Spotify. Let me see if I can find it.
Awesome. I'll listen to it in the gym. So what's it called? Lovecraft, right?
Yeah, so let me see. Oh, I can't. I'm trying to find the original tweet where I put this.
HP Lovecraft playlist. What is this one called? Right, I'm just out of the app here. Sorry.
The Horror at Red Hook. There's two readings of it, one by a British guy and one by another. So here, I'll put the original link to this. I included both the text and the audio from Spotify for it. And so, like, yeah, I mean, it takes only 30 minutes to read by text. Most of Lovecraft's stuff is pretty short. None of his stuff is really, even his longest works are maybe novellas at best, around 100 pages. But this one isn't even that.
Yeah, that's odd, man. I'm in this playlist of all of his stories, and this one's not listed there. So yeah, I'll check it out. Thanks.
Yeah.
I'll take you something to drink after though, just before you start. I found this other author. I think he's English, but like Turkish or whatever. But he goes into like Frankism, Bolshevik, all that, but kind of like similar to Lovecraft. I think like it's kind of like horror stories. So I'll send you another author.
Yeah, send it to me.
Yeah. Oh, I got it here. His name's Barack, but I'll send that off.
Perfect. So yeah, did you guys have any other thoughts, initial thoughts, just overall? Did you like the story? Did you find it compelling? Did you find it interesting? Hussein come up. So yeah, Hussein, I don't know if you had a chance to read it or listen to it. If you had any initial thoughts, we're just going around with initial thoughts before we get in deeper.
I I didn't. I actually started it and then I got sidetracked doing a bunch of other shit.
I had to listen to it a few times. Well, a couple times anyways, and then I re-listened to it again this morning. Because just from where when you have to decide, like, or not decide, but like when he's talking about, okay, it's just a dream or is this reality, and and I don't know, you just have kind of I liked it. Um, just it was kind of hard to get into at first, but no, I actually enjoyed the book.
So yeah, no, I mean, like I said, if you read enough Lovecraft, and I've read most of his stuff, most of his fiction. He also has a bunch of letters and stuff he wrote, but I've read most of his fiction. He hints heavily, and that's why he's very hard to adapt in film. Some things have tried to adapt him in film, in various ways, but it doesn't really, because it's a lot of hinting around things, right? And it's at the limit of perception, right? That something drives somebody mad and stuff like that, or the madness of reality, right? Is the idea that there are certain hidden things that are kept from us that if we really knew, then would drive. And it's cosmic horror. He goes through two main phases. There's his dream cycles, which are a lot more kind of, how would I say, they're both all kind of related, and he kind of touches all on the same things. But yeah, his dream cycle is a little bit more kind of like fantasy, philosophical, than his Cthulhu or whatever cycle they always call it, because there's one story called the Call of Cthulhu, um, which actually it's fine, but like yeah, it's in some ways that one's overrated. I think some of his other ones are better, but it deals with this concept of cosmic horror, as he calls it, right? To him, the universe is malicious, and there's more horrible things in it than there are good things, really. And this kind of touches on that, I think, heavily, right? And of course, once again, it's not just the horrible, supernatural entities that these people are serving. It's also the people. It's the cultists and things like that will usually get you, right. It's not the leaders. It's not the whatever. It's just that run of the mill guy who'll stab you in a corner and stuff like that. And so I think this one came before Call of Cthulhu. I'm gonna have to check what was the year on this one. Well, I think this one was published. Maybe it was published after he died. He died rather young. He died at like 47. So yeah, so this was published in 1927. Call of Cthulhu might have been early. That's the I want to say it's 1924, but maybe I'm wrong. Because yeah, they've been published and republished. Oh no, that's the game. I don't want the game. So yeah, it's common thing. Oh no, so yeah, this one did come. So yeah, it, this one was published after. It's always hard to say with some of these authors, right? Like which one they wrote first, which one they did first. It seems like this one was kind of written and thought up before that, but he's kind of touching on some of those ones.
Says it
Um,
was written in 1925 and then published in 1927.
yeah. Yes, actually, it says here Red Hook is a transitional tale situated between the author's earlier work, which is often called his dream cycle, and the later Cthulhu mythos. So it is kind of transitional there. This is probably one of the first ones where he's touching on this kind of cosmic horror and all that stuff that he kind of delves into deeper with the Cthulhu mythos. But of course, especially with this one, the main thing is just the way that he describes this sort of mass immigration, right, as being malicious, right, the kidnapping and all that stuff of this. And it is kind of like just interesting, just as it does. Now, was he being, just kind of fantastical about it? But of course, we're seeing a lot of this stuff where, yeah, there seems to be people bringing in these foreigners with all sorts of promises, and the people don't integrate very well, right? And they're usually like, they almost serve as an underclass. Like you see them there, and you might not think about it. But of course, in this case, the main character is a detective who's supposed to be much more kind of perceptive and stuff like that. And this would be rather interesting too, because this is kind of at the nascence of kind of like, modern detective. Um, police detectives in cities and stuff like that, right? The 20s, the teens, and all that stuff. Where you really have somebody who is, it would have been a relatively new profession back then. The idea of investigating a crime and all that, scientific, what do you call it? Criminology and all that stuff. Of course, the interesting thing here, so like I said, so this is where Lovecraft is somewhat controversial, right? He's pure wasp, right? He's actually an atheist, but his family was kind of old money, whose fortunes kind of made a downturn later on. So he's living kind of off meager means from a family fortune, right? Kind of like the way he almost describes um the main character, the main sort of guy there. So like I said, I'm always bad. Soydam, right? He has a very similar sort of, right. Like his family had more money. His father died. Well, no, actually, both of his parents end up going mad. His grandfather had money, but then dies, and that was rough on him. So he's one of these kinds of people who, yeah, has like a small family fortune. So he has some small independent means, but barely just enough to kind of keep him. And that's why he was kind of a writer. While he was living in New York, he occasionally tried to work some normal jobs, um, but he just couldn't. And the interesting thing is, he had a lot of self hatred, and in some ways, I think Soydam is almost kind of like a darker version of himself, right? A guy who has money, not a lot, kind of maybe the way he saw himself in, like, 20, 30, 40 years. He's probably in his 30s, maybe 20s, late 20s, early 30s, probably when he writes this story. Um, and so somebody who's like really into researching the macabre and stuff like that, and obviously though the fear there of going too far, getting too into it. So the interesting thing here though is that, yeah, his main character, right? So he's an Irishman, right? And but he sort of like, backhanded compliments. He's like, oh yeah, the guy's very logical, but he's got that, mysticism of the Celts, right? He believes in the fairies and all that stuff, right? So I think that's why he chooses that kind of character, right? Because, yeah, this is, like I said at the beginning, right? This is when the Irish started to become the a less offensive immigrant in America, right? They were the older immigrants, and so it's like, okay, the Irish, versus some of the other groups coming in, and so they kind of have, yeah, to that waspy mind that he had. The Irish were, a little bit fantastical, but also capable of being logical and concise and all that stuff. And that's what you see with his main character, is that he can straddle both sides, right? He is logical and stuff like that, but he's not unwilling to believe, that there's something more going on. But he's rational enough to know that, when to shut up and to stop talking about it, because he doesn't want to get committed to an asylum. So, and it's interesting that he talks about the Yazidis. Now, maybe because the Yazidis are a strange group still in the Middle East. Um, they're not like the Kurds. They're slightly different from the Kurds, and he kind of combines the two, and he kind of hints on this. Now, of course, they've become actually much more kind of, I think, well known the last decade or so, because in the Syrian war, there some of these anti-government groups in the Syrian war. There are Yazidis. They have a weird religion. It's somewhat Abrahamic, but it's also like they have all these angels, right? Like they worship the various angels, and of course that's why, like, sometimes are they angels, are they demons? They're kind of much more kind of complex and strange, and it's kind of much more mixed there. So that's of course the way he spells it. I think these days it's probably spelled like Yazdi or something like that. You can look up Yazidis. Um, I think I'd read about them before I read this story, so I kind of vaguely knew. But
A bunch of them got torched in a big dog cage not that long ago in Syria.
yeah, because now they're like on the anti-government side with the Kurds, with those, and so Yeah, and they're what's the word? Endo.
Devil
Well,
worshiping the
they're also
witches.
endogamic, right? So they don't marry outside of their group, right? So
They're like
what?
gypsies.
Like gypsies, but yeah, even more so. I think yeah, like very much so. And so it's another one of those kinds of groups that just kind of been there for a long time, and you can't really, when did they really show up? What's their actual origin? Stuff like that. So now it's interesting here because, like I said, this would have been very early. I think this would have the FBI would have been fairly nascent, if even existing at this point, right? Because he's talking about like this whole kind of jurisdictional conflict between the local cops and the feds, right? This would have actually been one of the earliest stories that kind of talk about that very sort of common theme in detective fiction. It's like, oh well, this is federal jurisdiction. Oh, this is local jurisdiction. And so, of course, that's where, because I'm just kind of scrolling down through it and it talks about that too. And so that's kind of interesting, just kind of how this is kind of right there, kind of early on within, sort of that detective fiction and stuff like that.
Well, he does mention that at the time that boss was a pretty big thing for the feds, right?
Well, that's the thing. I mean, like, I think he even uses the word like illegals or something right in here, like illegal immigration and stuff like that. Because this was actually a big problem at that time. Is There's a weird book by G.K. Chesterton. He was talking about it was called like What I Saw When I Went to America. He's a weird British author, but he was talking about the process of going because at this point there really was no real immigration policy, and this was causing a lot of problem for the U.S. Right, it was starting to get all of these, these these hordes yearning to breed free, right, which is not American policy. Um, and how they were trying to solve it, right? So at that time they would ask him a bunch of questions at Ellis Island, like how many wives do you have, right? Which was both, I think, to filter out both Mormons and Muslims, and stuff like that. There was also questions around because this was a problem that this was during an age there when there was a lot of anarchists, right? And anarchists just being a form of communists at that point. And so they were causing a lot of problems, right? And a lot of them were coming from these countries, right? Italy and whatnot. So they were the U.S. was trying to kind of grapple with what do we do with these boatloads of people? Which ones do we send back? How do we control this? Because other governments weren't really like controlling who was leaving, right? If anything, they were just letting them get loaded up on boats and sending them off there, right? From certain regions that were undesirable within their countries, right? So it was not. So it was actually a big problem back at this particular point there. And yeah, and it
So
was the same thing he was seeing that we saw like 10, 15, 20 years earlier. You have a neighborhood that was just nice, working class, or even notable, and then very very quickly it deteriorates, right? So that within 20 years it's just a shithole overrun by illegals, right?
is he for sure writing at the same time? Like he's not back in the whatever 30s writing about the turn of the century. He's writing about the same time he's kind of living there. Is that
Pretty
correct?
much. There's no reason to believe that he's writing about an early, right there. He doesn't say anything. If anything, it seems quite modern, actually, right? So I think he's definitely writing within contemporary times there, the 20s or so, right? When he was living there, I'm pretty sure he was living there in the 20s. So
Yeah. I thought that part where he's talking about the different types of people who are coming in and he's specifically referencing like, and I honestly have no idea at what point we stopped calling them Assyrians and started calling them Syrians. Like I just wondered when I was reading through it, is it like he was writing it as a contemporary piece and now it's 100 years old, or was he writing it 100 years ago about, say, like 20 or 30 years prior, or some blend of in the future? Like, I never got a great handle on
No, no,
that.
I'm pretty sure it's supposed to be. He's usually very clear when he writes about things like historical, but most of his stuff takes place contemporary. Like there might be like references to earlier ages, but he's so. I mean, this one I mean, it's about as contemporary as it can be. Assyrians and Syrian is slightly different. I mean, they probably come from the same thing, but like Assyrians are, yeah. I think
I
I
can.
mean,
So Assyrians are a people. I mean, like before World War One, we had the Ottoman Empire. Within the Ottoman Empire, you had different ethnic groups. Assyrians was one of the ethnic groups. It's a very ancient ethnic group. The country Syria was formed after World War One when they divided up the Ottoman Empire. Those are British.
well, and that's what you see here. So I mean, the groups he specifically mentions there: Syrian, Spanish, Italian. So Italy after World War One, right? Like Italy was only recently, right? This is what people tend to forget: is that Italy was only unified sometime in the 19th century. I forget. It was in a series of things, right? But they were still trying to kind of deal with certain populations there that didn't quite fit the standard Italian, right? This is why there are so many Italian dialects, and they are quite different. They're almost different, separate languages. About it, so some of them are as different, right? I mean, what they speak in Sicily and what they speak in northern Italy is about as different as English and Dutch to some extent. Now, of course, these days they all speak standard Florentine, I think. Italian, right? The language of Dante and all that stuff. But the languages can actually be quite different and whatnot. So I mean, so Syria was a relatively new country at that point. So was a lot of this, and so that's where a lot of these are coming out of, right? Yeah, is a lot of the upheaval there, a lot of the pressures. Strangely enough, funny enough, it would have been some of the stuff going on in Palestine there that would have been putting pressures on some of this stuff too and whatnot. I think Syria probably the way he's using it there was probably a generic term for pretty much the Levant, right? For that region that had been, because like the borders were still vague there. Fall. I mean, you have to remember this is like not even a decade after the fall of the Ottoman Empire and World War One that he's writing this. So these are just populations that are getting shifted around very quickly that had kind of been sitting there for hundreds of years. But yeah, he also touches like on kind of like so the main the other character, right? The Soydom character. Like I said, in some ways, it's almost somebody that you can see, like that he almost kind of, if you know about Lovecraft, it's almost like like, and here's an interesting one, like and to repeat with knowing lyrics such mystical words of names as Sephiroth, Ashmodai, and Samael. Because of these days it's strange to people. Sephiroth here, which is a name from the Bible and the Kabbalah and all that. But of course, most people these days, whenever they think of that, they think of Final Fantasy VII. If I even search for that on here, so for the concept from the Kabbalah, right? And so of course that's the thing, right? Soidem was into the Kabbalah, right? And that's what he mentions. And that's originally how Malone, the detective, tries to get to Soidem. He's like, "Oh yeah, no, I read your monogram on the Kabbalah," but then the guy's like, "No, no, I've moved on past that, right?" But Sephiroth is actually one of those concepts from the Kabbalah there. And like I said, I mean, this would have actually been a time when most people probably would have known those words as well. Like back to the point there, Lovecraft liked to read about the sort of how would I say, the mystical and culted type things there, and so he was probably more informed on these topics than most people were back then.
Well, yeah, but if he was, married to a Jewish woman in New York, one of the prominent Jewish communities there is the Hasidics, the Chabad Lubavitch movement, right? And so they're really into they're the ones who are disseminating Lurianic Kabbalah, right, based around the Zohar. So I guess, yeah, I'm curious
I
about
don't
that.
know. I think he was just into this stuff before that. I don't know like how deep. Let me see if I can find on his wife. Like I think she was mostly a secular like Jew, and this would have been like I think this would have been about the time Shabbat Lubavitch was coming around, but like it would not have
Yeah,
been a prominent
but
thing there.
Chabad Lubavitch is just like one sect of Hasidim. Hasidim started in the 1700s, so it was in New York before the Shabbat movement like went mainstream. And the whole thing about secular Jews, like for the most part, unless they're actual atheists, like an atheist Christian, they're working with the Shabbat movement. They're working with the Hasidic movement. They're secular because they're all secular, right? That's what the Kabbalah is. The Kabbalah is your Hasidics and then your seculars. So if his wife was secular, living close to a Hasidic community, that tells me a lot.
Well, no, what I'm saying, this would have been when that wasn't quite. This would have been very early on in that point.
But
So
what year? What year? Because this thing's been going on for at least 300 years, so it's not like new. It's pretty old.
Well, yeah, no, but I mean, Shabbat Lubavitch didn't come there until much later.
Well, the Hasidic movement was in New York a long time ago, like hundreds of years ago. The Shabbat Lubavitch movement just came to prominence in the late 1800s, I think. It's just one sect of Hasidim. The bottom line is they're all, practically applying the Lurianic Kabbalah. So Shabbat Lubavitch is just one, organized sect of that.
I'm trying to find her name. So let's see. When did her family? She was older than him.
Was he famous before she married him?
No.
Okay.
They were both writers. So they met at an amateur press convention in Boston. So, yeah. But if another thing to know about him, he actually knew Houdini. He was a ghostwriter for Houdini. Houdini had like a short story posted. Yeah. Yeah. So there's it was one of his earliest ones. So it's called "Imprisoned with the Pharaohs Under the Pyramids" or whatever. Is a short story written by American fantasy author H.P. Lovecraft in collaboration with Harry Houdini in February 1924.
Houdini was also Jewish.
I think he was gypsy, or no, I'm thinking. I think he was a gypsy or half gypsy, if I remember. No, he was just I get Houdini mixed up with Charlie Chaplin. It was Chaplin, yeah.
Oh no, Chaplin wasn't Jewish.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just saw this post about Houdini being Jewish. I didn't really research it, so I mean, in full context here, I just read one post.
Yeah. But yeah, so that's. But yeah, that's where he would have met them.
But it's just interesting that Kabbalah is part of the story.
Yeah. Well, like I said, it would have been an early reference. I actually doubt you can find a reference to Sephiroth or Sephiroth, how you want to pronounce it, prior to this in American literature. Because of course, like I said, I mean, yeah, everybody knows it these days just from Final Fantasy, and the Japanese have like a weird, like if you've ever watched, I think I'd mentioned before, there's a show called Full Metal Alchemist. They get into the Ein Sof and all that stuff quite heavily.
Really? That's what Kabbalah is.
Yeah,
What's this so called? You said it's what is? Did you say it's Korean, Japanese?
the Japanese. Yeah,
What is
if
it
you
called?
look, Full Metal Alchemist.
Hmm. Foam Alchemist.
Full Metal Alchemist. It's kind of a weird one, but yeah, it kind of touches on it briefly. It's mostly just done kind of as kind of a, how would I say, like I'm pretty sure she probably just looked it up on Wikipedia, was looking for weird stuff like that. But yeah, they bring in stuff like that sometimes. The Japanese are always been very syncretic and stuff like that.
Yeah. Huh. The principle of Iron Soft has like merged with Judaism since the 1500s. That it, pre-existed Buddhism.
Yeah, so there's a part in here like, yeah, just like a kind of mixture of a bunch of words. Elohim, Sother, Emmanuel, Sobath, Agla, Tetragrammaton, Agros.
Yeah, that's it. It's all idolatrous, so to speak. So that's
It's very, I mean, that's the thing. I actually have reasons to believe that, yeah, when it comes to anything related to the occult, Lovecraft was extremely well read, more than he ever tells people. Because there's certain things that I and this is more kind of like a something I'm working on. That's why I don't let out the secret sauce on this. But there seems to be certain things that he uses as inspiration from these things, and then never really hints at much more. Like even so, I mean, I'm pretty sure he, like I said, he in many ways the character from this that kind of goes too far down the rabbit hole. I think is more kind of the way. Now, of course, that character is much older. This would have been when he was relatively young, but that's almost I think the way that he imagined, he could be, right? Like I said, old and alone and weird and awkward.
well, like a lot of fiction stories. Like often it's inspired by something real.
Yeah,
So he may have known of a story or came across some information, looked into it, and thought it was interesting and decided to write a book about it, put a fiction book. Meaning that when you only have pieces of the story, you kind of have to imagine the gap. You might transform that into something more interesting for the reader, but often it's often based in some reality, especially back then. Not always, but
yeah. Well, like I said, he's very in touch with a bunch of things that nobody else touches on, but his whole perception of the immigration problem, right? Like in this, the way he describes it, right? Let me see. Like he has a few different passages in here that are interesting. Let me find it. Mm. So Malone found in this state of things a faint stench of secrets more terrible than any of the sins denounced by citizens and bemoaned by priests and philanthropists. He was conscious, as one who united imagination with scientific knowledge, that modern people under lawless conditions tend uncannily to repeat the darkest instinctive patterns of primitive half-ape savagery in their daily life and ritual observances. And he had often viewed with an anthropologist's shudder the chanting, cursing processions of blear-eyed and pockmarked young men which wound their way along in the dark small hours of morning. One saw groups of these youths incessantly, sometimes in leering vigils on street corners, sometimes in doorways playing eerily on cheap instruments of music, sometimes in stupefied dozes or indecent dialogues around cafeteria tables near Borough Hall, and sometimes in whispering converse around dingy taxicabs drawn up at the high stoops of crumbling and closely shuttered old houses. They chilled and fascinated him more than he dared confess to his associates on the force, for he seemed to see in them some monstrous thread of secret continuity, some fiendish, cryptical, and ancient pattern utterly beyond and below the sordid mass of facts and habits and haunts listed with such conscientious technical care by the police. They must be, he felt inwardly, the heirs of some shocking and primordial tradition, the sharers of debased and broken scraps from cults and ceremonies older than mankind. Their coherence and definiteness suggested it, and it showed in the singular suspicion of order which leaked beneath their squalid disorder. He had not read in vain such treatises as Mrs. Murray's Witch Cult in Western Europe, and knew that up to recent years there had certainly survived among peasants and furtive folk a frightful and clandestine system of assemblies and orgies descended from dark religions antedating the Aryan world, and appearing in popular legends as black masses and witches' sabbaths. That these hellish vestiges of old Turanian Asiatic magic and fertility cults were now wholly dead, he could not for a moment suppose, and that he frequently wondered how much older and how much blacker than the very worst of the muttered tales some of them might be.
A lot of interesting keywords in there. Didn't
Yeah.
say
It seemed like H.P. Lovecraft was a little bit ahead of his time, right? Because you see what's going on now and what they've discovered in New York with the tunnels and whatnot. He seems like he was really ahead of his time. But I don't know what immigration was like back in the 20s, but he definitely saw something.
Well, he basically lived next to the HQ, the most influential, faction of the global cabal. So like a lot of what Zink just read was like seen in Frankism. Like Frankism was unholy acts, it was incest, that type of stuff. So he probably through his wife or contacts, because she was Jewish, Hasidim, presents itself as a Jewish movement, even though it's not, because they don't actually care for the Torah. We care about the Zohar. So he was probably exposed to some of the stuff before, when it wasn't public.
So here's the dream that might not have been a dream, right? So, one second. Here cosmic sin had entered, and festered by unhallowed rites, had commenced the grinning march of death that was to rot us all to fungus abnormalities too hideous for the Grey's holding. Satan here held his Babylonish court, and in the blood of stainless childhood the leprous limbs of phosphorescent Lilith were laved. Incubi and succubi howled praise to Hecate, and headless moon calves bleated to the Magna Mater. Goats leaped to the sound of thin, accursed flutes, and Egyptians chased endlessly after misshapen fawns over rocks twisted like swollen toads. Moloch and Astaroth were not absent, for in their quintessence of all damnation the bounds of consciousness were laid down, and man's fancy lay open to vistas of every realm of horror and every forbidden dimension that evil had helped. Blah blah blah. Yeah. Well, Purgis. So he seems familiar with various levels here.
And even when you get to the ceremonies, it matches up with all the the Outstroms ceremony that on video, the chants and the whole nine. It's all very closely parallel to the shit that I've seen when you dig into the occult stuff. Word for word on the ceremony.
So does that stuff, like, I mean, I'm vaguely familiar with the occult, mostly Crowley onwards, but is that stuff informed a lot in terms of what we read and see about it in media? Is a lot of that not informed by Lovecraft? Or that's because they rely on Lovecraft because he kind of had a direct route to the original source?
He would have been.
Yeah, that was kind of my thought too. It's almost like it was right out of the book.
So he probably would have been, like I said, probably one of the first people really writing fiction with these things in there. His influences were mostly British guys. Now, some of the British guys, and actually the quote at the beginning of this, one of them is a guy named Arthur Machen. Machen was more kind of dealt with, what do you call it? Celtic mythology, right? He was like a Scotsman or something, or a Welshman, I forget, one of those. or maybe a mix, but yeah. And then there was another guy named Algernon Blackwood, whom and we've done his stuff. Now that guy had traveled all over the world, and he wrote the Wendigo, right? So he'd actually spent some time in Canada, up in mining and logging camps, and was very familiar with some of the native traditions there. And he has sort of a weird perception of these things as well too. Um, Blackwood, both Mackin and Blackwood. There's another guy named like something, Lord Dunsany, that he also liked, but that guy's more fantastical. He doesn't quite, I think, touch on the occultic aspects. I need to read more of his stuff. It never really took me, but those are like the three main influences on Lovecraft. But Lovecraft himself seems to have read quite heavily, um, yeah, things about the occult and so on and so forth. There,
But even like, so if you want to go like to Aleister Crowley, which I think was just a little bit older than Lovecraft, so he would have,
they would have been
no,
contemporaries, actually. They would have been largely contemporaneous Crowley.
all
This would
right.
have been kind of at the height of Crowley, I think.
Okay, well, before those two, you had Blavatsky. So Blavatsky was, writing a lot of books on what was it called? She formed the whole Theosophical Society that brought in, was linking Kabbalah. Like she never really admitted that she was linking Kabbalah, but she uses Kabbalah theory in her occultism, and she's like kind of like the one of the mothers slash fathers of like remote viewing. But she ties it into Hinduism, Buddhism, and she creates this Jesus Christ, the society that's a global society that moved from New York. It was in New York in the 1800s, mid 1800s, and it moved to India. And the logo that she formed, that they created for this Theosophical Society, which is occultism, is a mix of a Star of David and a swastika. So I believe that the way that they formed World War II, they were pulling occult knowledge from her findings. So, she probably also influenced Lovecraft.
There was a lot of weirdos because this was the height of spiritualism, but undoubtedly, Lovecraft read, what's his name, the guy who wrote Sherlock Holmes, Arthur Conan Doyle. Arthur Conan Doyle was heavily into spiritualism and seances as well too, right? So this there was, yeah, the Theosophical Society, there was the psychical stuff. Blackwood writes a lot on that stuff too. Um, so yeah, these were very popular from 1890s up until the 1920s, which is when he would have been writing this stuff. Um, there's also the Vril Society and things like that that would have been going on about there. This was kind of, yeah, the heyday of the modern sort of new age movements, right? 1890s to 1920s.
Yeah, people were into a lot of weird shit back then, man. Family seances and all that, like traveling door to door mystics. And I mean, I know a lot of it's rooted in prior stuff, cabal, and insert whatever mystical, pseudo religious bullshit here, there, everywhere else. But it's weird
Well,
because this far
yeah.
down the
Well,
pipe, I
Houdini spent a lot of his time debunking it, right? Like he was a
right.
popular debunker on this stuff.
Well, that's his last trick, so to speak, right? Between him and his wife. If it exists, I'll reach out from the other side, and he never did. So you got at least some type of answer there.
Yeah, but is that what that was intended to show? Was he
Yep.
trying to show that like religion is a bit of a joke? There isn't another side type of thing, but that's not
Not
really what
necessarily
that is.
religion, but it was the spiritualism. So spiritualism, right? So the seances. He really hated the seances, right? Because, yeah, he was a magician, so he hated. Because, of course, even though he was a magician and did all that stuff, right, he was very clear on that there's something magic is just skill and everything. So he hated anybody who claimed, you know, otherworldly powers and this stuff, right? Like, I mean, all of his tricks were based on just on sheer skill and self discipline, right? And that was always his emphasis. Right now, he would play on it to some extent. He'd play on the kind of mysticism, right? The sort of illusion of it, but At the same time, though, he seemed to have a deep hatred for the the mediums. He hated them.
Yeah, he definitely resented the shit out of that. And I think, like to a large extent, all of them do, right? Because it's saying what you do is what I do, and what I do is commune with the Great Spirit and this, that, and the other thing. And he's like, no, you're a fucking idiot. Stop trying to, grab onto my coattails and push your narrative through mine while you basically discredit both of us in the process.
But
So
if he didn't
I
die
thought,
in Montreal, but what it was supposedly the way he might have died is that, like on a bet, he let like a guy punch him in Montreal, like some student from McGill, and it might have like burst his appendix, and that would might have been what he died of. Was it was like right after a
yeah.
performance in Montreal.
Yeah, I mean, like that was kind of his famous on the road trick. Like everybody in this auditorium line up and hit me as hard as you can in the gut, and I'll show you like I can withstand it all. And again, that's his discipline. I mean, the guy's fucking entire abdomen must have just been one giant callus, right? So there's no doubt it's a quote unquote trick, but there's no like mysticism or magical reasoning behind it. It just looks pretty fucking cool, and it demonstrates, to the skeptic that whatever he's bringing to the table is quote unquote real. So it's another. I mean, if you put yourself in his shoes and go through the kind of shit he did and all of the work, I mean, that was his entire life, and then to have a bunch of fucking like, haggard old women with crystal balls and their gypsy caravan kind of tailing behind his army train selling their wares, that would get old pretty quick, I would think. So that whole thing about his I'm not exactly sure how it played out in the media, but the whole thing about the promise with his wife that if it's real, conduct a seance, da 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 da, and I will reach out. That was his final, I think, fuck you from over the fence. So I always thought it was super funny.
So this is actually from the Wikipedia, and this is of course what we see. Civilizational decline also plays a major role in his work, says he believed that the West was in decline during his lifetime, right? And that's, of course, what we see here, right? Is that he sees it getting overrun by, less civilized populations. But and almost getting onto the level. If you guys go, this becomes a further theme within Call of Cthulhu, which is, of course, like I said, probably his most famous story there. But it comes up in some other ones too. I'm trying to think off the top of my head, but and Call of Cthulhu would have come fairly soon after this one. It seems like that's why this one's kind of a transitional tale between that, like I said, that dream cycle and more his cosmic horror.
But the whole thing with Houdini, right, is like we have to keep in mind like that, he was a secular Jew. So the issue isn't so much that he's Jew, but at the time there was this movement to make the masses not believe in anything spiritual. I mean, that's been the agenda for the past 150 years. So yeah, there's a lot of bullshit in the crystal balls and all that kind of stuff. And I think that people back then were completely misinterpreting Kabbalah. They just don't understand it. Right? They think that you can do magic in this. Well, they don't even know what magic means. They think magic is like, do the unthinkable. And that's not what that is. So, but the whole notion of two realms and the whole thing of magic is literally something that they are weaponizing against us today. And it's not through the media. It's basically just understanding human nature and then, tearing us apart. But they do believe in two realms being interconnected. It doesn't mean that, you're doing magic here. So if anything, Houdini was a huge prominent figure back then. The entire world was looking at him. And the one thing that he did successfully he brought a lot of people into the materialistic world because they stopped believing in all that kind of stuff, because they made it into fanfare, and then he just exposed it as being a joke, which, a lot of it was just like anything today, right? Think about like conspiracy theories. They'll throw in 5% of the most crazy conspiracy theories, even though 95% of them are legitimate, and then they dismiss the whole movement. So, they've been doing stuff like that for a long time. And all of this comes from the Hasidic movement, the Lurianic Kabbalah. So, I mean, I'm not so sure with Houdini that's, he was necessarily, he probably made a joke of like the crystal ball, like gypsies and all that. But I think there might have been an agenda behind what he was doing and how the media was giving him so much attention.
the Jewish agenda.
No,
So,
the occultist agenda.
yeah. So actually, it just reminded me of something I wanted to ask you, Zink. The I think it's when he's talking about being inside this, dilapidated, rundown old church, and he's in the basement, and he looks up and sees the insignia, the scribe of like ancient Greek over the anti-altar. I wondered what your take on that part of it was.
Not only that, but in every language too, right?
Yeah, right.
Which part? You mean the Greek inscription?
The Greek, yeah.
Well, I think it's what gets repeated there at the very very end too, right? Like he's like and he sees some like foreign woman like talking to like the child, right? Oh, friend and companion of night, thou who rejoicest in the baying of dogs and spilt blood, who wanderest in the midst of shades among the tombs, who longest for blood and brightest terror to mortals, Gorgo, more no mo, thousand faced moon, look favorably on our sacrifices.
And so that's the meaning of the inscription that he reads when he's under the
Let me
church.
see. There was
Like I know they actually translated it. They said what it means, but I'm not sure I tied it back to anything through the rest of the
Well, there's a
book,
few
or if I
different
did, I'm
places.
not.
So then, too, he did not relish the Greek inscription on the wall above the pulpit, an ancient incantation which he had once stumbled upon in Dublin college days. And so, yeah, it's that's the same one there.
There's no like implicit underlying explanation for that, I guess. It's just kind of there.
I mean,
I don't know. It just kind of stuck out a bit to me, like a nail in the floorboard. And then I wondered, and I was just thinking about it now, and I'm like, did they ever circle back to it and underline whatever it was supposed to mean? Because as I remember it, it was, there was these panels and, all these like little hidey holes and shit that had been built into this church that they'd kind of taken over, deconsecrated, turned it into their evil temple. But when he goes and references that specifically as maybe being like the oldest thing in there or the original thing in there, it's this Greek, ancient Greek inscription over
well, it
there.
happens again. Here we go. O friend and companion of night, thou who rejoicest in the baying of dogs, hear a hideous howl burst forth, and spilt blood, hear nameless sounds vied with morbid shriekings, who wanderest in the midst of shades among the tombs, hear a whistling sigh occurred, who longest for blood and brightest terror to mortals, short, sharp cries from myriad throats. Gorgo, repeated his response. Mormo, repeated with ecstasy. Thousand-faced moon, sighs and flute notes, look favorably on our sacrifices. Lilith, and then later on, Lilith, great Lilith, behold the bridegroom. I don't know. I mean,
And
if you
that
want to get really conspiratorial here, now like with his wife, right? She'd been married before. She was a bit older than him. She already, I think, had a kid. Now later on, they divorced, but he never signed the paper. She moved away and she married somebody else. Technically, out, but that's because she believed he'd signed the paper, right? Now, yeah, was he like? Because this would have been during their brief period there together. Because he does focus on Lilith, great Lilith.
wasn't Lilith supposed to be this like also standalone Kabbalistic occult type figure? The Wiccans and Druids all reference that name.
The legend around Lilith, at least there's multiple things, but in the Bible is that in some versions of the Bible, it's like she was created simultaneously with Adam. She's almost kind of like it's a repeat of the Satan story, right? Where yeah, God commands the angels to bow down to man. Satan refuses, right? So Lilith is told to bow down to man, and she says no. So then he casts her out, and then he creates Eve, who's submissive and servile, right? So Lilith is kind of like a repeat of that kind of thing, right? Where which is actually a common common theme in some of these things, right? This idea of like creating two groups, and one is supposed to be another, but one from the new group does not, acquiesce to whatever.
Yeah, the shadow, the dark shadow or whatever. That's why it was banging bells.
Because in some ways, like it seems like that's the effervescent thing that was tittering, right? Is that like a little thing, right? I think it's almost described like that was like, and then of course, oh, whatever the guy's name is, I keep forgetting what it is. It's Soy, or what's the guy? Soydem, right? So Soydem at the end there, when he's pulled into that thing, and there's that effervescent thing on the whatever, right? That's toying with him and everything else, almost like it's supposed to be like a marriage with Lilith there, right?
Yeah, marrying the devil.
A
So,
female devil in particular, right?
well, the true devil, as I like to describe them. I don't think women should be given a pass here. No offense to OG, but they are the true great Satan.
No,
Let's see. Let's see.
what was that conspiracy zinc that you were saying with his wife? The theory there.
Well, give me a second here, because I'm going to line up some dates in my mind before I say this exactly.
Okay, so those two, they got onto a boat after, or they got married, went onto a boat, and then they got murdered, right? And we don't know who murdered them, right? And then in his he left a note to be returned to what did they he in the note he said, return me to, and it was just, somebody help me.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
So
Return me to this person despite
right,
any
but yet
instruction
the
otherwise.
doctor found him. So how did he get returned to this under tunnel world issue, like things that's going on, the deep dark occult and what's going on? How, like, who returned him there, and why did they do that? Because then that's the story again, goes into how Malone found out what everything was going on, and then it was like a battle for the throne, if you will, but he was essentially dead. Am I getting this wrong?
It was across, like I said, that's so, yeah. So Malone witnesses this after he smells that stuff, and he feels like he's fallen into this depth, right? This endless depth, right? And that's where he witnesses these things, right? It's beyond. It's almost like it's trans-dimensional, right? It's almost like he's passed into things. And so what you have is, you have pretty much what's implied here, if you read enough of this stuff, is it's almost kind of like a dual world, right? Where it takes place out of space. Now, it physically, he deals with this also in Dreams in the Witch House, right? Where you're in a physical space, and all the things are there, but that what's actually taking place there is much wider, right? So essentially, he passes in and he sees them as they row the body into the tunnels, right? Which are just mundane tunnels there under this house. But in the fantastical aspect of this, they kind of almost cross, while they exist in that very small physical space, they pass into a dimension that occupies it with a much wider space, but simultaneous to it, right? And so that's where he sees the weird ritual there with the tittering thing that's effervescent, and the big whatever and all this stuff, right? And then when he awakens out of that, now it seems like Soydem escapes, right? So in that last moment there, it seems like Soydem goes and crashes something down on that pedestal, while the tittering thing is chasing after him, and pretty much breaks the spell. Now he's still dead, but maybe he saves his soul. I think that's what's implied. So that's why the bones are there. That's where they find Malone, and they find that it is part of these tunnels. It's not as fantastical, but it's pretty much that there's two parallel realities there, right? It collapses into that reality of being much more mundane, but it's pretty much like, you're supposed to, I believe, take it that the events he witnesses in that vast chamber did in fact happen, but you have to cross into it, right? With a supernatural aid there. Now it takes place kind of superimposed on physical space there, but it's a very small physical space because yeah, the bones of Soydam, right? It's just his bones, right? Meaning something more happened to him because of course it was only, you know, a day or so, no, well it was the exact same day, right? So they collected a body and now it's just bones, right?
And
So
this was in view of the dance hall, correct? Where he fell into
this
the tunnel
this
on the bone.
this was in Soydam's house. But I think they're all connected by tunnels, right? But this, I believe,
And,
that's what
and
Malone, right?
the
Because there's
and
pretty much,
the only reason he survived the blast, so to speak, the way he said, was because he was under the house. No.
yeah.
He
Well,
fell
the
through.
idea is that he actually fell out of the house, probably into another dimension. The house blasts apart when he comes to. He's of course under the house, right? Because he's existing in almost two physical spaces at that point, right? I think is the way it's supposed to be taken. That's the
Because
way.
That's kind of how I took it.
everybody in the
But
house dies, right? There's
Everybody else, yeah, because the house is
yeah.
destroyed, but he's passed into this other dimension. He's probably not even there physically, but then when the other realm collapses in on itself because of Soydam's actions, right? He is then placed back into the closest physical proximity to it, right? It's almost like a parallel world that exists, right? And so when that parallel world collapses, he's placed back into just this small kind of tunnel with Soydam's bones there.
so, I mean, OG just reminded me of this when they're talking about the body and being returned and like this explicit instruction, then they reference the this pool, right? And I'm not sure if the pool is supposed to be in the great alternate timeline or the existing little shitty squalid one, but again, I could be fucking this up. If you're thinking of it as like the body's coming in on the river Styx, it's going to this portal or whatever. That pool's filled with sacrificial blood, and then he's reborn through that. Is that, or am I just making a stretch there? Like that is the ritual, whatever you want to call it, for effectively bringing him back eternal life.
Well, so
Maybe
it
that.
seems like they drain all the blood out of his spouse to be, right? So they drain all of her blood out of the woman he actually marries, right? And then they collect his body and then they take it, right? And there's three simultaneously things that are happening all at the same time, right? Like Malone, I think he's at the church and then he goes over to Soydam's house, right? There's all the guys at the church and then he's in Soydam's house, and then of course out there on the bay or wherever they are, is the stuff going on with Soydam's body and wife and all that stuff.
Yeah,
So
because he says at one point that point cannot be disputed because he was literally found with the bones, right?
yeah, and so yeah, he passes into that realm. Now, what it seems like is that the tittering thing, which I'll just call Lilith because it seems like it's supposed to be Lilith or something like that, but it's not even that Lilith. It's a far more fantastical Lilith. Um, that Lilith is consuming the blood of his wife, and somehow that brings him back, or she's like holding him. Like I guess at some point, maybe I think maybe because I don't remember if he moves or not while it's like messing around with him, and then they wander off out of sight of Malone, and then later on Malone sees Soydam rushing back, being followed by Lilith and the masses of cultists there, right? Like almost like I don't think he's fully awakened at that point. So then they bring him back, and maybe they're like somehow supposed to consummate it and all that. And then of course now he realizes his folly, right? And of course he is just the old Soydam, right? Not the thing he had become, but he's just his real self. And so then he pushes down whatever that altar is, and that of course destroys him and destroys the it seems like it's supposed to be like a marriage of some sort there, almost like a consummation or something like that. And
See, then
now,
he says that he propped up on his elbow and looked over and saw him coming running from the cultists. I imagine him like hiding in the bush,
yeah,
watching the ceremony, and Sorum gets away, and then bang, and then he wakes up in the tunnel.
So let's see. See if I can find that part.
He does that propped up to see what's happening, and only to see Sorum coming over the hill, and then he reaches destination, at which time the statue falls into the water, and he reaches the destination, and then bang, and he wakes up with the bones.
Because, yeah, so here, let's see.
That was where I got the perception that he was outside the house when the
Yeah.
so-called explosion happened, that he was watching from the bush, so to speak.
Well, no, so what it is he's in the house, and he's exploring his study, and a cat comes through and knocks over some vial of something, right? And this causes him to take smell of it, right? And almost then at that point he feels like he's falling. So here, like if I let's see. So once a lean
Well,
black and
it
white
does.
cat edged between his feet and tripped him, overturning at the same time a beaker half full of red liquid. The shock was severe, and to this day, Malone is not certain of what he saw, but in dreams he still pictures that cat as it scuttled away with certain monstrous alterations and peculiarities. Pretty much, it's implying, I think, that it's a familiar. It's not actually a black cat; it's familiar. If you read the dreams in the witch house, you get this more. Then came the locked cellar door and the search for something to break it down. A heavy stool, right? A heavy stool
So
stood
the
near, and it's
so the cat murdered him. Is what I'm reading out of that. The cat that we were discussing last week. Zinc's beloved feline
well,
protector.
it's not a cat; it's a
Was it-
familiar. There's a difference. I'm not going to dive into this right now. But it opens
Yeah,
something. Then came the locked cellar door and the search for something to break it down. A heavy stool stood near, and its tough seat was more than enough for the antique panels. A crack from the other side, whence poured a howling tumult of ice-cold wind with all the stenches of the bottomless pit, and whence, reaching a sucking force not of earth or which, coiling sentiently about the paralyzed detective, dragged him through the aperture and down unmeasured. It's almost kind of like an Alice in Wonderland, with whispers and wails and gusts of mocking laughter. Of course, it was a dream, right? And of course, now it goes into everything that happens down there. He's pretty much drawn into all that.
But yeah, he references all that, whatever you want, that transition, if you like. He references it as like this is the part where they think he was crazy. He can't explain it. He talks about it as a dream, and I mean it makes sense if you think he's breaking from one whatever dimension to the other. And obviously the cat trapped him because cats are evil. But that's just my take.
yeah, but he blacked out there. I don't think he was down for long. Like he didn't die or anything. Like you're talking about Malone, right?
Yeah, this reference was earlier, wasn't it? That this is halfway through the story where he's in the church and then breaks down the
No,
walls,
no, no.
and then
He goes back to Soydam's house, I believe, and then that's where he passes. Right. Malone was very busy among the alleys of Red Hook. Blah blah blah. Much was lost. He wanted to be in several places at once and decided on Soydam's basement flat only after a messenger had reported the complete emptiness of the dilapidated dance hall church. The flat, he thought, must hold some clue to a cult of which the occult scholar had so obviously become the center and leader, and it was with real expectancy that he ransacked the musty rooms, noted their vaguely charnel order, and examined the curious books, instruments, gold ingots, and glass stoppered bottles scattered carelessly here and there. Once a lean black and white cat, and then of course, so he's in Sweetham's basement, and then he's drawn down into the other place.
The connecting tunnels, yeah. And they've got, I don't know if they specifically mentioned Sodom's house, but they're like pretty explicit about these tunnels connecting all the various places in Red Hook and, um, being used for nefarious purposes.
yeah, and I didn't necessarily pick up that as another realm, so to speak, but the draft from the tunnels being the greasy rape tunnels of the Jews is kind of what I was picturing.
Yeah, there's a lot of like, I mean, it's I guess if you're thinking on the two levels, the two planes of existence, there's all the bleeding over in the story, and then there's actually in the physical realm or whatever reality, the actual tunnels connecting them anyway. And all the fucking different places he goes, the doctor's office, the church, the house, like it's always like the odors, the remnants of, what I assume is sacrifice, there's bones and like he describes these piles of like I'm gonna say human detritus, just bits and fucking pieces. And it's like that same thing popping up at all the different points of inquiry, and then in his own
It's like
dreams.
he was half a step behind, and at the end of the story, he finally gets close enough, and he walks out and lights up with bones.
Well, and then there was 2 living children that were brought into the light that then died, right?
But that was off of the ship. That was legit. That was a federal operation or whatever, though, right? That was when they busted the ship, which was under the main guy, the bad guy's name there.
That
Sergeant's
was
name.
that was under Surdam's house in the somewhere in the tunnels, yeah.
No, I thought that was on a boat that they busted.
No, I believe it was they found them in the tunnels.
Not because there was a ship captain that they caught that wouldn't testify until they got him alone. And
Right, he was
it was
scared.
full of captives, if I remember correctly. And part of that was where you could smell the blood on the ship as well.
Yeah, like it's what do you call it? The guy he references, they're all too scared to talk, and then the dude's name is attached to the ship that's in the bay, I'm assuming,
Yeah,
and that.
exactly. And then the children that died in the daylight were the ones that were abused in the ship. They said that
In the hole.
they said it was actually a mercy kill. It was good that they died because of the condition they were in.
Was so fucked up, and they're transporting them using the tunnels, right, from the ship and the other people. These like whatever gypsies, Assyrians, and low-browed folk that he's finding all over the streets. They're moving them in from the
Yeah,
ships.
yeah, from the
Into,
ships to the
into the,
tunnels, and that was the one ship that they caught that ended up being under Poseidon's name. That's what I gathered from that.
yeah, yeah.
And then they didn't prosecute ship the ship captain and help. They just handed them over to the X-rays.
There are a lot of really fucking strange parallels between the immigration bent on this story and what's happening right now. It's kind of it was a good pick for hitting a whole bunch of different like areas that we're currently experiencing with something that was written, 100 years ago as a just a work of fiction for a small cult of people that probably was aware the guy even existed. And obviously his work's a lot more popular now than it ever was when he was alive. But I suppose there's a reason for that. If you can make 100-year-old fucking story relevant to today.
Well, and when they caught these mules, so to speak, they rather than convict them because it was under Poseidon's name, they just basically gave them the green flag and let them sent them back for another shipment.
Well, that's often a theme in Lovecraft's book. This one is pivotal. It would be interesting. I haven't really compared it here, um, but this one is pivotal. Like his other ones kind of have, like I said, like kind of a dreamy fantasy sort of theme and all that stuff. This one is when it starts to get much more dark and much more sort of, I think, yeah, like yeah, this cosmic horror, this idea that there's more things going on in the world, and that the average person will just kind of sweep it away, and that's what you see in this, right? Is that Malone kind of gives up, right? He's smart enough not to, like, explain too much what he witnessed, right? Because he knows that people just won't get it.
Yeah, and that's like where I didn't go into the other realm, so to speak. I just thought that he was keeping the reality to himself because of the fact that the other officials were not drawing attention to the fact of what was actually happening. He pretty much went for site evaluation and then got shipped to a different area.
Well, something I've long thought about, right? Like you can look at like a large structure. You really don't know what's going on inside of it. You assume it's whatever. There's so much, and there's so many people, and especially the last few years, yeah, there seems to be an undercurrent of society that we know nothing about, and all sorts of things could be going on, right? You have no idea.
Even I was just gonna say I was talking to this guy. He's like an old dude that worked for the district of Vancouver, like the city. And he was like a big union guy at the end of his career. But we were having a discussion similar to that, and he mentioned that like 20 years ago, there was some spot he used to go with one of his guys for lunch, and they're parked there one day, and they look across the street and realize there's this like maybe 2.5 story small building, kind of centralish downtown, but it has a parking lot of like 300 vehicles, and anytime they're there, the parking lot's absolutely jammed. And it's not a public lot, so it's not like it's multiple buildings. It's all for this one building. And they were talking about how the size of the building and the size of the lot just don't match up, and that the lot is always filled, and like it stuck with him basically through his his whole career. So you'd be like, and if I was in the area, I'd pop by there on a Saturday. There wouldn't be a single car in the lot. You go there, Monday 9 to 5, absolutely jammed to the brim, and you rarely saw people coming in or going out. And then you'd go by and it'd be completely empty again. I'm like, yeah, that is kind of fucking weird. I wonder what's in there, like thinking, I don't know, maybe it's a agency building or some shit. But then he was talking about recently, and I think this is the end of Canada Way, maybe in Burnaby. They've been building this mosque for, I think it's been being built for the last 6 years. So figure that one out first of all. Secondly, and it's a big building. It again is only about, let's say, 3 or 4 stories tall. Like it's quite a big mosque, but it's not a fucking skyscraper. Um, but he estimated the pit, like the foundation hole they built under it, would have been at least 13 stories deep. So you got like a 20-story building, right? Effectively, or it could be, that protrudes 3 stories above ground. And I'm thinking like, yeah, that's definitely not a foundation issue. That's I don't know what, but I'm saying like it wouldn't be beyond my imagination to think that's probably a federally funded, you know, quasi-public partnership. Yes, we're gonna help you construct a mosque, and you're gonna accept that we're putting a, I don't know what, data center, doomsday bunker, you name it, underneath it, and this stuff's going on. Those are just two small examples in a city that I've only lived for in, maybe less than a decade.
There are more things.
Underground and above.
Everywhere. And
Have you ever read up on Kowloon Walled City, Leaf?
Yeah, Hong
Yeah,
Kong.
that was something else, man. It was like its own
Fucking
district.
crazy. Yeah, it's fucking crazy. And it's still like it's a dividing wall for a lot of different things, like the triads, the classes, the you know, the uppers and the lowers, and then, you know, it's like a self-governed district. I mean, I don't know what the history there's crazy. It's ancient, right?
And like
Like there's so much.
the beauty of it is it was like 14 stories of like PVC and fucking dog fence. Like, it wasn't even legitimate structure.
Yeah. Well, like Mumbai, right? Or sorry, Bombay. You look at those slum cities, they're fucking like millions of people living in them, right? And they don't exist. Technically, nothing's. And I mean, look, like, yeah, fine, you can make the argument. Lots of parts of the world are the third world, but is more British than the British in terms of their administrative fucking class. So the idea that something like that exists, and it's not just one little example. I mean, it's everywhere. These places exist like right under your nose, and you probably never even um, looked beyond the newspapered up windows. You
Well,
know.
and the beauty of that walled city is that it was under contract for 100 years. That even under war, like in war times, it still remained property of the original. I forget who owned it. Was it the British that had official ownership over it? Or it was America. It was I forget the label it had, but the contract kept it within a different law, complete different.
Yeah, like an autonomous city within the city, the walled
Yeah,
city of
it
Kowloon.
was a
It's got a
contract that
crazy
kept it
history.
remained its own zone.
Yeah. Yeah, I know the British whatever you call it, the lease that ended in 1999, that was the end of their 99-year lease and they turned it back over, but I don't even think that agreement applied to Kowloon. I mean, I thought it's so fucking crazy, man. That whole part of the world would have been just a madhouse back when this book and Lovecraft and all these occultists and all this shit was, you know, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, all the opium trade. You've got like I can't remember the name of the triangle there, but it's basically Macau, Hong Kong, and mainland China, right? And you think it's like slumlord millionaire shit, but that part of the world had been running other parts of the world for at least a couple of 100 years, unfettered, unabated, and then the rest of the world was happy to look at it as like, well, you know, they're just a bunch of monkeys shipping bananas on junk boats. Who cares? It's like, well, actually, all of the Bank of Wealth of England does, and you know, all these like supposed European superpowers are beholden to the dirty deals in those channels.
Well, I'm just supposed to
It's
show
pretty
you
fucking amazing.
that we're dealing with some shit, but it's nothing new. There was a whole new can of worms back then. The government has been corrupt and is corrupt and probably will always be corrupt.
Yeah, no, we're born of corruption for sure. So the idea that we like got it right or something is fucked. And I think again, like that's actually really cool when you read old shit. Like you're reading old Rudyard Kipling and it's an unedited or it's an original version. Like it does not read like anything you'd pick up at, you know, whatever the fuck, insert name of bookstore here or Amazon, your copy from there, two completely different things. I know that's a thing now. People are out there sourcing and collecting old books. Like, well, I mean, people always have, but for different reasons, right? Now the reason being everything's gonna be fucking censored. You're gonna be reading the Tom Sawyer version of, you know, No More Nigger Jim. So, like that concerns me. That concerns me on a whole bunch of different levels. But stuff like this, where they're dealing with what would have probably been this, you know, the equivalent of a fucking X space. A bunch of like conspiracy theorist weirdos talking about the fucking tunnels and Red Hook, and then there'd be polite society walking around, you know, with their walking canes and doffed caps, saying, "Wow, that's just fucking poppycock. That doesn't exist. You know, you're crazy. You must be a laudanum enthusiast." And it's like, no, no, it's going on. It was going on then. It's going on now. Like the same segment of the population just doesn't want to accept it or acknowledge it.
Yeah, so Sink, I've been reading the story for today, and your tweet is kind of accurate. I thought you were joking when you said this kind of relates to illegal immigrants and I think foreigners or something you said, but I get what you're saying. Um, I have a question though about the story. I'm almost about done, but he talks. It seems like he sees a lot of evil in the city, but does he talk about evil in the government and like the way the whole system is organized? Or is just the people and the infrastructure that he sees the evil things that come out of, or where else is there a source of evil in the story?
It's an undercurrent of evil. It's the
Yeah.
government's impotent, right? The government's
Okay.
irrelevant and impotent to this. But there's things going on. There's people. It's always implied like it doesn't know who's funding these people, who's bringing them over, what agents are convincing them,
Yeah.
right? The government is just simply impotent to it.
Okay.
Or
Yeah.
if anything, the government just sort of, like, oh yeah, we don't want to mess with them. We'll just leave them alone.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And the character Malone, I think it's a really good character. It's like because Malone wanted to be a poet, but he ends up you know kind of coming face to face with the evils and the urban life. So it's interesting that like as a poet, I think of like someone who's probably more connected with Mother Nature, will go for long walks or long hikes and can stare at a beautiful sunset. But that's what his seems like his calling was, like who you actually wanted to be as like a little boy or when he was growing up he aspired, but he went to let's go into the urban center and like tackle evil and see all these grotesque evil things going around and be too sensitive to that situation. So I think it's a good contrast. The character Malone makes a lot of sense. I find that very relatable, that you want to be a poet but he goes and becomes a police officer.
Well, like I said, it's an underhand sort of compliment to the Irish, right? It's like they can be rational, but they got a little bit of that voodoo in their mind, right? But I think that's what he's trying. You need both in this case, right? Because on the one side, you have people who are too much, in modern society. They're not actually sophisticated, but oh no, that's not real. That's not real, right? And then you have the other people
Right.
who are in it, right? These swarthy characters and immigrants, right, who are fully believing this. You need somebody who can span both, right? Somebody who can bring logic and reason and all that stuff to it, but who doesn't simply reject out of hand, you know, anything that doesn't conform to their worldview, right?
Hmm.
You have to approach the unknown with logic and reason, right? And I think that's what Lovecraft, creates in him, and he of course uses racial aspects to do that. But that's I think what he's talking about here, right? And that is to a certain extent the problem we have right now. Right now, on one side, yeah, you do have the people out there who are, in our current society, right, who are these dregs of society, and on the other side, it's just like trust the science. Oh no, that's not happening,
Right.
and everything
Yes,
else.
yes.
But then,
Yeah, yeah.
but then, and it's not as touched as much here. Well, maybe to some extent, you have people who are raving lunatics, right? Who
Yes.
are like, oh, everything's, blah blah blah, and they're just not rational and reasonable about it. Maybe they're pointing out something real there, right? And this is what you'll often find is some weirdo in his stories who is pointing this out, but it takes both things, right? You can't run down every rabbit hole. You can't believe them, but you can't just automatically run down them. But you have to bring logic and reason to it, right?
Hmm. Yeah. So wait, where is the logic and reason though to Malone? Because I mean, he went through some experiences. It's a story, so we can maybe believe it's real, but maybe he is kind of bordering between reality and what he believes he's seeing or is experiencing. Right? Is Malone
Well,
even that? Is he that reliable as a narrator of what actually was going on through those events?
Well, once again, he examines his own mind and experience, right? So of course, when he first experiences it, he explains what he experiences, and then he realizes that he's just going to get locked up into a madhouse. So
Yes, yes, that's
he
true. Yes, he had
takes
that self-awareness. Yeah.
he's even skeptical of his own experience. He doesn't reject
Hmm.
it; he simply uses it. But what can he do with it? And this is the important part there. What can he do with it? If
Hmm.
people aren't going to believe it, if he can't control it, and so it's just trying to maintain the sanity of it, right? He believes that what he experienced, right? There is no other explanation for it, but it's hard to explain, right? That is to say, he can rationally understand it, but of course there is no explanation for it. So then, what is the purpose of trying to explain it, right? So he's keeping it in his back pocket and he's trying to last through it, but
Yep.
he's um, but he's also not going to like run around and make a fool of himself, beaten down. Right? That's the irrational part, is to realize that in trying to explain this to people, he's not going to get anywhere. Right?
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, you're right. So yeah, no, that is the that definitely is the more rational side to him. I'm
Well,
reading this. Yeah, sorry,
I
go
think
ahead.
he dives in a little bit there in that, with the boat, that they take it as a win, that they've solved the issue, and basically everything goes back to normal function, and the immigrants are back to full movement, and everything's all basically they solved nothing, but they stopped one boat and shipped the ship captain back to where he comes from, and that was it. The Kurtz, I think, right?
Yeah, they look what we're doing. Look, we're busy doing it. You were complaining about loud, crazy noises from this dance hall, frequented by these undesirables in society. So, be certain we're on the case. We went and shut it down. And then it's just that's the most superficial answer, satisfies the people. Even, let's say he managed to wake up, that he could convince to listen to his insane man's ramblings. The best he could hope to get out of it was, we're gonna close down an illegal dance hall, but no one's looking at like what's going on literally right beneath it. That's interesting. Excellent. That's great. It's all window dressing and bullshit. Um, I was gonna say, when City Boy asked you, like, basically who's the bad guys, right? Now, I don't know where our other listener speaker went. He should have stuck around for this part. Um, is he, like, aside from the occultish Kabbalistic references, is he underlining the Jews? Is that where, like, he's making a definitive statement here, or is that just you?
So, like I said, he is a waspy guy. Now, he does marry a Jewish woman. He seems to have things with her. Now, it is interesting that this was probably a year or so into his marriage, and they seem to get separated about a year or so later. I can't remember exactly. It seems like he moves back to Rhode Island soon after that, and they kind of stay separated. So it is curious here. Um, the one thing to notice about a lot of Lovecraft's books is there's not a lot of female characters very often, right? Um, but this one very much, right, like in this, that devilish thing is female, right? The Lilith character and all that stuff.
The
So
twittering,
it's kind
whatever.
of strange that this is soon after he would have been newly married, and he seems to have, yeah, been infatuated with his wife, right? Like, I mean, like I said, he could never really bring himself to divorce her at some point there. And it's also a strange thing too, because he was much younger than her. Well, not much younger, but I mean, he was like 33, she was like 40, I want to say. Yeah, or 41, right? So they get married, and then it seems like, he's with her, but then yeah, he's trying his best, but it's just not working out. But what was her interest in him? You got to somewhat wonder what was her interest in him, right? I don't know. It's just strange that, like, soon after he's married, that yeah, suddenly he has this. I mean, it was kind of
He's got a
like, I mean, that is to say, like, so how Jewish is she? Now, this is an important question. Now, I think overtly she wasn't. Supposedly, there's quotes by her, but of course, who knows what she was like? 'Cause of course, she outlives him by decades, right? He dies relatively young at 47. She lives to be 89, right? And of course, there's
oh
there's
wow.
later interviews, like, as because he died semi unknown. He wasn't completely unknown, but yeah, he was kind of a minor writer. And
Right.
then it was later on,
He got much
yeah, like kind of in the
famous.
50s.
So was she the benefactor, her and her children? Did he go on and remarry, have other kids, have
No,
other
I
family, or was
I
she the
don't think so, but I don't
okay,
think his estate. What happened was it was one of his younger proteges named August Derleth, who kind of bought, kind of acquired his estate and kind of printed it, and there's a lot
right.
of like mixture around him, even, right, because he was one of his proteges, but the guy was also like super Christian, like, and all this other stuff. So yeah, so like but he kind of also helps to kind of um
Make him famous.
yeah. And so in later life, when she's interviewed about him, like, oh, was he like a weirdo? Was he like bad and bad? And she's like, no, 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 he was a completely adequate lover. So I mean, it seems like, yeah, like he was. Now he had like a weird low self esteem and stuff like that, right? Like because of his mother and stuff like that. And he thought, he is a rather unattractive guy. Is he freakishly ugly? I don't know, but is he an unattractive guy? I don't think that's hard to argue. So he had like a weird sort of mommy issues. He had extreme, yeah, issues like that.
But he's like a shut in and stuff like that you've referenced, and obviously he's into some weird shit that would have probably been even perceived even weirder 100 years ago. Obviously, people weren't. Yeah, you'd be attracting like the cult. I don't know what fans, the e-girls would be into that, whatever their equivalent was 100 years ago. But otherwise, he was like, obviously a guy with a brain
Yeah.
and serious creativity, kind of living himself on the fringes
Well,
of
so I mean,
of
this is the
acceptable
official thing,
society.
right? Green, who was married before, later said Lovecraft performed satisfactorily as a lover, but she had to take the initiative in all aspects of the relationship. So he's probably kind of a nervous guy, and maybe she was like trying to find some guy who obviously looked like an up and comer, right? Like, maybe, I mean, maybe that was her goal, was to find a guy who, because like they would have gotten married right when he was, yeah, starting to work with Houdini there, right? It looked like his, career was kind of up on the,
Upward trajectory.
yeah.
Typical women don't change, and then he writes one of them into its story, and it's the goddamn devil. Come on, I love it.
Well, I think too,
He's becoming more of a person.
on the on the Jewish front, he had every opportunity to zone in on that in this story, and rather than that, he painted it with a pretty wide brush on the immigrant front. It wasn't just one ethnicity; it was everyone, right? I think if he was, if he had every opportunity to target the Jews and say, "Yeah, they were filthy Jew tunnels and they're a bunch of broody rapists," well, he didn't zone in on that. He just kept painted it with a real wide brush, in
Yeah,
my
I mean,
opinion.
if we want to dive in here, so here, marriage in New York. Lovecraft's aunts disapproved of his relationship with Sonia. Lovecraft and Green married on March 3rd, 1924, and relocated to her Brooklyn apartment at 259 Parkside Avenue. She thought he needed to leave Providence and flourish, and was willing to support him financially. Green, who was married before, later said Lovecraft performed satisfactorily as a lover, but she had to take the initiative in all aspects of the relationship. She attributed Lovecraft's passive nature to a stultifying upbringing by his mother. Lovecraft's weight increased to 200 pounds on his wife's home cooking. He was enthralled by New York City. I think he was a tallish guy. Like, he looks lanky. I think so. I mean, who knows? Maybe like I can't remember how tall he was. I had to go look that up. But so yeah, he put on weight. He was enthralled by New York City and what was informally dubbed the Calum Club. He acquired a group of encouraging intellectual and literary friends who urged him to submit stories to Weird Tales. Its editor, Edwin Baird, accepted many of Lovecraft's stories for the Alien publication, including Under the Pyramids, which was ghostwritten for Harry Houdini. Established informally some years before Lovecraft arrived in New York, the core Calum Club members were boys' adventure novelist Henry Everett McNeill, the lawyer and anarchist writer James Ferdinand Morton Jr., and the poet Reinhard Kleiner. On January 1st, 1925, Sonia moved from Parkside to Cleveland in response to a job opportunity, and Lovecraft left for a small first floor apartment on 169 Clinton Street at the edge of Red Hook, a location which came to discomfort him greatly.
Huh.
Later that year, the Calum Club's 4 regular attendees were joined by Lovecraft along with his protege Frank Belknap Long, bookseller George Willard Kirk, and Samuel Loveman. Loveman was Jewish, but he and Lovecraft became close friends in spite of the latter's anti-Semitic attitudes. By the 1930s, writer and publisher Herman Charles Koenig was one of the last to become involved in the Calum Club. Not long after the marriage, Green lost her business and her assets disappeared in a bank failure. Lovecraft made efforts to support his wife through regular jobs, but his lack of previous work experience meant he lacked proven marketable skills. The publisher of Weird Tales, was attempting to make the loss-making magazine profitable and offered the job of editor. Lovecraft declined, citing his reluctance to relocate to Chicago on aesthetic grounds. Baird was succeeded by Farnsworth Wright, whose writing Lovecraft criticized. Lovecraft's submissions were often rejected by Wright. This may have been partially due to censorship guidelines imposed in the aftermath of Weird Tales story that hinted at necrophilia, although after Lovecraft's death, Wright accepted many of the stories he had regionally rejected. Sonia had become ill and immediately after recovering relocated to Cincinnati and then to Cleveland. Her employment required constant travel. I think she was a journalist of some sort. Like, that's where they'd met. Adding to his feeling of failure in a city with a large immigrant population, Lovecraft's single-room apartment was burgled, leaving him with only the clothes he was wearing. In August 1925, he wrote The Heart, Red Hook, and He. In the latter, the narrator says, "My coming to New York had been a mistake, for whereas I had looked for poignant wonder and inspiration, I had found only a sense of horror and depression which threatened to master, paralyze, and annihilate me. This was an expression of his despair at being in New York. It was around this time he wrote the outline for the Call of Cthulhu with its theme of the insignificance of all humanity. During this time, Lovecraft wrote supernatural horror literature on the eponymous subject. It later became one of the most influential essays on supernatural horror. With a weekly allowance green cent, Lovecraft moved to a working class area of Brooklyn Heights, where he resided in a tiny apartment. He lost approximately 40 pounds of body weight by 1926 when he left for Providence.
No wonder he's got such a cult following, man. That's quite the fucking varied road he took.
Yeah.
It's cool. I mean, like I would say, I don't know, whatever. Obviously, I'm gonna have to try and relate myself to everything, as all of us good narcissists do. But, as far as the Jews and me go, it's like 90+% of the ones I've ever known, grew up with, been friends with, like call it their Judaism was about as important to most of the exact same people I know that are quote unquote Christian. Like it just doesn't factor in until whatever that day is that it does, Yom Kippur or fucking Rosh Hashanah or
Yeah.
the high holidays, and then yes, we're Jews and we're Jews in a group together, but otherwise it's almost like it doesn't really exist. And then you add in today's insanity. Like this shit's been going on for fucking thousands of years, right? And I think for probably the majority of that time, it's been a slight variation from the situation I just described for quote unquote like Jews in the West. But then, like as things have gotten more heated and more confrontational over the last, since World War II, yeah, I think there's like pressure to be on this side or the other. And then that allows it or opens the door and encourages people to run through it to Zionism and this much more fucking hardcore version of what left to its own devices is a pretty innocuous, uh, generally pleasant thing. And now it's added on and layered on, and of course people take control of the narrative and make it become a fucking an evil that exists that isn't even really there. But if you're not like cognizant of it, right? Or you claim not to care, well then you must be a part of it. And hence I continue to enjoy my status as a Zionist operative on X, despite I'm sure most Jewish people on here, having heard what I have to say, think that guy's a fucking asshole. So we're all getting pushed into these fucking cattle cars, man, and I don't like it. I'm not saying like the what do you call it? The fucking okay, I'm gonna lose the word, but anyway, like I don't like the idea that because you hold a certain set of views, then you're somehow unable to accept fact, right? Historical fact is an important thing for all of it, and a lot of it does not look good for my sweet chosen precious baby angels, but also a lot of it is skewed um to elicit that effect. So I'm always hesitant to not give benefit of the doubt when I see the fucking evil machinations behind it. And I think some of those are actually coming from their side in order to make people, quote unquote, choose a side. I'm always kind of aware of that anyway, as an apologist.
I just think you're starting to notice.
Trust me, I've always noticed, Zinc. It just means, I'm always, what do you call it, skeptical of what it is that I'm supposed to be noticing. So when it's like we got into it a little bit last night about the narrative being pushed, the whole trans agenda and shit. And then it's like, okay, so why is it acceptable just now, all of a sudden, boom, like it was almost overnight, that if you're a rapist, you're a man, you have a dick, and you go out in the world and you're raping women with it, and you're getting caught, and you're saying, I'm sorry, and I won't do it again. I'll take the no raping course. I'll be better. And they're like, okay, I think he's rehabilitated. Let's gauge his risk to reoffend and send him back out in the world. And the first thing the guy does is rape. It's like, all right, well, now you're going back in jail. And he's like, okay. And the sentencing's going to be much stiffer this time. It's like, okay. And then just at that sentencing date, he's like, by the way, I'm a woman now. And they're like, no problem, Gary. We're going to send you over to the women's penitentiary, and you just keep that raping dick of yours in its skirt. And nobody says anything. Nobody's like, I mean, yeah, of course there's stories about it, but it doesn't stop it from happening. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, like that's the extreme end of inversion and fucking upside downness. And what possible fucking motive could the government, other than demoralizing and blah blah blah, what possible motive could they have for something like that? And it leads me to mass immigration and the army, conscription. Like, maybe 10 years ago, if they'd conscripted, it would be valid for people who don't want to die in an oil war or whatever to say, yeah, I'm a woman, I can't go, I'm a guy with a dick. It's like, that's no. Remember when you begged us to stop catering to that nonsense that we created and intended for you to revolt against, and now you're begging for it to be done to you. So yes, of course we'll acquiesce to your reasonable demand, dear citizen. um and yeah, and now you can be sent to war as a chick with a dick. So, like, threading these needles and then stitching us up with them seems to be a game plan they've had in practice forever. And as we just wake up nascent to this new reality, we're still not aware of the game being kind of played on us, right?
Yeah.
You think I'm full of shit on that one, or I'm seeing ghosts that aren't there type of deal? Or would you say there's some kind of valid point in that, and not just related to the trans shit, but
No, like
everything?
everything they're doing is just a slap in our face, right? Like the fact that troops forced to be locked up, but but Pittsburgh gets out. Like serial killers are priority on the old fucking being treated well scale, but yet somebody who stands up for values, not that will not be tolerated.
I mean, it kind of comes back to there what I was talking about with the character of Malone. Like, there's some people who, yeah, it's that weird curve, or I don't know. Like, there's some people who really are, and I'll be quite clear, pretty much practically animals, right? They're involved in this stuff. They're just whatever, and right, like some of the swarthy youths in this book. On the other side, you just have the NPCs who look like humans, but they just go along with the official narrative. Oh no, that's not what's happening. This is the real world. This is what we believe. This is whatever, right? You can believe in certain things, but so long as it's within the nice, concise, whatever, everything else there, right? Never doubt. And then it's almost like a diamond of things, right? So yeah, you have the animals on one side, the NPCs on the other side, and then on the other axis, there's sort of well, who knows? Maybe there's those who actually control everything, right? But that's a very small group, and I don't think anybody who's wasting their time in here is one of those. Now, what we do have, I'd say, to some extent, is yeah, you have the people who I don't know. They've been broken by this stuff, but now they're just madmen, right? So that's what you hear mostly on these spaces, right? People just like everything's whatever. The sky is falling. I can't do anything, right? Railing on. Sometimes they're right, sometimes they're wrong, right? It's that weird guy, on the corner of Times Square, whatever. Maybe he actually does know something that's going to happen, but then between that is a bunch of weird shit he's saying, and then you got you know a group where it's like you know I know, and this is the important thing. I know there's more things than I know, and I try to deal with those things to the best of my ability, but try to not overly just judge it. But then it comes down to what can I control, what can I control, and all that stuff. So I mean, that's what you have with all this stuff, right? Is yeah, there's
You better know when to pump the brakes, right? And I mean, there's an unlimited amount to eat up and get into that hole. But at the end of the day, like they have their daytime tops where you're kind of within the realm of reality, and in the evening, if you want to push the limits a bit and play ball with the better side of things. But I feel like in that you're consciously finding middle ground. You're not just that guy on here fired up in 14 hours a day thinking you're going to save the world. You're just being consciously aware of the garbage that's going through the filter and picking up a few nuggets on the way.
well, it comes down to how to so like since we can't be at the top of the heap, be one of the people who are like pulling the things for better or for worse, right? That's on of us. So that's that fifth group, right? But what do you do with the animals, right? So I mean, with the animals, what can you do, right? And this is the mass hordes, right? Now, this is what recently happened. I'm sure you guys have all seen it. It's that guy and the woman, right, who went to India, and he was beaten and robbed, and she was gang raped by 7 guys, right? Like that's the animals, right? You just don't deal with them. You can't deal with them, right? They are animals. The best thing to do. Now, the problem is it's the NPCs that are far by and far and wide, right? They'll insist like, oh no, they're not animals. Oh no, how could you say that, right? They'll enforce this stuff, right? So the animals are animals. The NPCs act like they're where maybe that other group, the one I said like there it's NPCs trying to act aware, right? So that's what we see on all these groups, right? So yeah, you just avoid the animals because they're animals. The NPCs, I mean, we got to deal with them because I mean, they're NPCs, right? They're the ones, fulfilling our orders and pretending to be our bosses and stuff like that, right? That's what NPCs do. They're there, and we have to deal with them. But of course, we just have to work around them. But then other you have retard player characters, right? So if you have non-player characters and playable characters, you have retard playable characters, right? And this is the guy who's like the level 7 whatever, who's now jumped onto your map and is fucking up all your shit, right? Griefing you, whether he's doing it intentionally or not. And that's what we have mostly on spaces here, is a bunch of retard player characters who aren't aren't programmed because they're too erratic, right? They're acting like they're aware, but they're just causing problems and they're just whatever else, right? And of course, one of them is causing the NPCs, right? So yeah, they go up and they attack one of the NPCs, and the NPCs go, on rage, and then we get cut off. So you got to, so I don't know, like that's the biggest problem with all these things, right? You got to deal with the NPCs because by and far, well, most of humanity falls into either the animals or the NPCs, right? Now they're both animals, but the difference is that one, I guess there's an evolution. Right? The animals just react like animals do. They rape, they kill, they steal, they whatever. Right? The NPCs are slightly better than that. They go through their motions. They can act like they're whatever. You can even have sex with them and have children with them and everything else, and feel like you're progressing with them. But deep down, as you lay there at night and you look at them, you're like, you don't really exist. Your brain is fucking empty, right? And my children, they're going to come out of you. There's a 9 out of 10 chance they're going to be fucking NPCs too, right? But then of course, then you have that other group which we have on here, right? Who, yeah, I don't know. They're too erratic to be NPCs, but they're not really people I want to deal with. They're just fucking retarded. and that's
I mean, listen, Zink, don't retard bash, okay? Because I'm hoping to run in the next general election and maybe become. I've never deigned to become the king of the retards, but certainly I'd like to be a high priest in the retard council. I think I can bring changes. I think I can, I think I can affect positive outcomes for my people. And I would just say this: the retards may be of use in terms of waking up and or deprogramming some of the NPCs. They may actually come in use in terms of let's say exposing certain elements
I'd say usually not.
of the fake
They
away.
become straw men for the NPCs, right? All they do is reinforce the NPC behaviors, right? They're pretty much rejects. I don't know, like that's the thing. Yeah, they're not. They're broken NPC is really what they are. They're not whatever. They're just broken NPCs, right? Who have a bug in their code and are now acting semi erratically, right? But that's because and of course the best example of this is like if you've ever played the Fallout games, right? NPCs have their certain loops, but sometimes there's so many like side conditions and stuff you can break some of these NPCs and they just like I remember there's one from Fallout 3 where like some guy was playing where he's trying to kill everybody and there was one character who's essentially invisible, but then he's not held. And so with the programming of this character, like he just starts wandering around, just like endlessly, just wandering around the map, just like no point, right? Because like his programming doesn't know what to do and stuff like that. And that's kind of what these people are. Is yeah, they're just
And he's like the side quest that you can't finish
yeah.
because that side quest is still on the board, but there's actually no way without a full reset to start that quest in the right order so it can be completed. I mean that's a beautiful ghost in the machine. You know,
Well,
that's
that's
just
that's
an
what they right.
unaccounted
That's what
for
the Ghost in the
variable.
Machine is. It's an accident that almost right. Its programming is so unchained. It's still going through loops and acting, whatever. But like it ends up reacting on a different cycle than everything else, and so it almost seems like it's become aware, right? And that's
It's a revolution, Zinc. It's a retard revolution. You can't stop it. You want to join it. You want to meld with it, and you want to be taken to the new, beautiful, retarded heights that it can achieve only by its own power of retardation, only propelled under the power of its own retardedness. It can't be co-opted. It's a beautiful, beautiful retard. So I have to disagree with you on that point, but with everything else, I mean, as usual, you got me. You make sense.
well, we can tell
You're
ourselves
clairvoyant.
stories about it, right? We can almost feel a connection with it, but yeah, it's just whatever. Man,
If I experienced human emotions, you'd be hurting them right now. You'd be hurting my sweet little retarded feelings.
No, I need everyone to give me their turnout, or you're gonna wait for the statistics first.
I don't know if you meant to open your microphone there before, but maybe you did. If you did, then you could reopen it. But I closed it because I didn't know if something was leaking there.
No, that wasn't me.
No, Farm Boy's mic was open.
Oh, my bad.
Okay, yeah, no, Joe. I didn't know if you were purposely playing something or if you were about to dox yourself, so I muted it.
No, I'm just I'm in two different spaces. I'm just hopping back and forth between the
Okay,
retardation.
but yeah, so I mean, I guess that's the other thing. I mean, yeah, it's kind of like, yeah, what can you really do with this information, right? It's like, oh yeah, there's a whole worldwide global cult that's infiltrating New York. So what are you gonna do with it? Are you gonna scream on the edge? Are you just gonna take your retirement and go and quietly go sit in a little town somewhere?
Well, and the thing is isolation is kind of a dead end, but it's not bad to have that option building in the background. Right? Like, if you're not prepared, you're a fucking idiot to a certain extent. But if you're a doomsday prepper, the facade panel back and the underground pod, well, maybe you're a little overboard. But I feel like there's a fine line between looking after yourself and dealing with the power outage and a full doomsday prepper mode, right?
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, I guess the main thing is like, yeah, like, and this is something I bring up lately with this stuff, and it is pointed here, right? Is, everybody's like, well, I'm waiting for everybody else to wake up. I can't do anything. It's like, no, there's still other things you can do, right? Because there's a good chance that nobody else will wake up. So, what are you gonna do in the meantime? And then you die.
Yeah, I mean, do you get food in your freezer? Do you have a generator? Have you thought if the power goes out for more than a day that all your meat can go bad and can fucking ruin you? You know, like a lot of people don't even like. Do you have a fucking raincoat in your car or a jacket? You know, the kind of shit that can kill you over something stupid, right? But they've only been built to step one. You know, they just get fired up and that's it.
Well, it's even on the other side of that. Say nothing really changes. Say that whatever course we're on here just sort of continues for the next 40 years, right? Slight deterioration, but society kind of mulls along. There's, you know, economic, pits and whatever, and, a slowly declining level of, or say, I mean, yeah, like in 20 years, will be where Venezuela is now. What do you do in the meantime, right? That is to say, there's no quick collapse, there's no moment of glory, there's no civil war or any of that stuff. It's just a slow decline, right? What do you do then? What is your prep then, right?
I mean, that's probably the most likely outcome. I don't know, short of like some type of international conflict. And we've had plenty of those. I mean, literally the last fucking 30 years has been one prolonged international conflict interspersed with, quote unquote economic doomsday scenarios that they then inevitably solve, again in quotes. And then, life just pretty well continues on. Like, it's a you can argue, yeah, it's deteriorating at a slower rate, or you can make observations about how things used to be one way and now they're not, and that's seemingly much worse. But all of that shit is also primarily tied to your own view on it, right? So, short of the actual lights going out and people realizing how fucked they are by not having some form of preparation, like I don't see a mass event kind of having anything other than chaos as an outcome. And the other thing I was going to point out, like, and I've had this conversation. I'd love to hear what your kind of response on it would be. But let's say you've got your cash, the lights go out, you drop your car, you hike out into the bush, you've gotten to your Shangri-La, you're now sustainable. I mean, even if you've done a really good job of preparing for it, effectively you're alone. One, two, you get a cold or a broken leg or any fucking number of myriad things that could go wrong. And then you're just basically now fighting to drag yourself back in to show up at the camp where you're going to be, 3 months late and see the true fucking plan unfolding. But like, even if you survive, you don't. You know what I mean? And if you survive in a group, then your group's just got a bigger target on it. And you're just a better, more efficient drone strike. So it's like, even preparing for that, you're still kind of fucked. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. Well, and the other question to that is it any fun? Is it enjoyable, right? Because it doesn't look like there's going to be a meaningful future. It's just going to be like toiling out there in the woods and dodging, raping bands of warlords and stuff like that. I mean, at that point, right, is it really even worth it? I don't know. I mean, to a certain extent, no, I'm not one of these people. I don't see any elegance in death, right? So probably would continue on. But like, if it just becomes pain and misery, right? Like, I mean, is that a win anymore? I mean, that to a certain extent is the difficulty, right? You have to enjoy every fucking day to some extent, but then you have to be able to make sure that maybe later you enjoy more days in general. Now, this is where it gets sticky for me, though, is this whole notion of retirement because there's diminishing. Actually, it's a fascinating game in some ways. Sid Meier's Pirates, the second one, because there's certain things you're supposed to do, but as you age, right? So you get your skills up in that game, but then as you age, certain physical skills decline. So it actually almost becomes there's like a golden point where you have to get it to be able to actually able to accomplish it, because otherwise, and that's what you get with whatever. It's like, oh yeah, no, like now I'm time to retire, and now I got all this money. It's like, and what do you do with it, right? It's like, oh well, I'm gonna I'm gonna go sit on the beach. It's like, well, I mean, it was one thing to go sit on the beach when you were young and sexy, but I mean, why do it now? I mean, in that case, just stick your walrus ass in your bathtub and watch TV, right? Like,
Yeah.
Well,
I
I
mean,
mean, there's a certain amount of enjoyment you can get, like apart from the stream of rape parties and defending yourself, just the fact of shooting a deer, seeing by a smoker, drinking a beer, enjoying life in the peaceful
Yeah.
nature. Like there's a beautiful quietness to that. And I mean, that's not to say you're not informed, that you can't talk to your neighbors, get on the CB radio or this or that, or create your own other form of communication to keep within your loop of survivors, so to speak. Right, and this isn't like end of days shit. This is like having the means to kill a deer, smoke it, and get by without
Yeah.
starving to death. Like
Well, it's kind of funny you brought up retirement too, because a lot of people they go through the fucking endless NPC toil and they're giving themselves the promised land as the reward. Like, yeah, I gotta work these weeks, I gotta pay these bills, I gotta put up with my wife's shit, I gotta listen to my fucking idiot kids go from like adoring fans to fucking hellion little cunts that, hate me. You go through all this stuff, right? And you make all these sacrifices and things for that golden day. But when you arrive at it, you're mentally broken, you're physically decrepit, you're corpulent, fat, tired, angry, racist, just jaded piece of shit, basically. And then your solution, the bomb to that, is like, nah, at least I'm in Cuba and, surrounded by the drug and sex trade. Thank God for this. It actually is hell.
see, no,
So if you
that's the
think,
wrong approach. Though it's not. Well, I gotta do this. Well, I gotta do
yeah,
that. No, you get to.
yeah,
I get to do
yeah,
this.
no,
You develop a
that,
life in a fashion that you get to do things that bring you joy, which in turn makes life worth
yes,
living, in my opinion. Right? And
no. I think you're right. I was coming around from the doom angle to the like, if you've managed to however you've managed to do it, if you can get to a point, say where you're in your like 40s, your 50s, it depends on the person, really. Like I know fucking 70-year-olds that go harder than I do, and they could be dragging carcass back through the bush, setting it up for the perfect cut of meats, ones to be smoked, ones to be grilled, some to be turned to sausage, and others dried as like and that's their like they really extract a lot of joy and pleasure from doing that, then that's fucking amazing, right? But if like you're putting that day off for the one you're currently slogging through, it just seems to me like it would be smarter to kind of get yourself off the tracks on the way. Maybe do a bit more in terms of the shit you enjoy with less in terms of the security you think you're going to need, so you don't end up in a position where you're like financially set, but basically you've wasted the the power of your life, the vitality you had to get there.
but I think there's a bit of a gray area there too. I can think of like probably 50 different seniors that work to survive, and that say they're
Right.
alcoholics that are heavy on the piss when they're off work. But if they have a job and they have a means and they have someplace to be, the motherfucker stays alive and stays fit and lives another
Yeah.
40 years. Like that. Yet, if
Yeah.
they don't, I mean, yeah, they could retire. They have everything that they've built up, They got a bank account. They got all the shit out back. They got, you know, this, that, and everything. But the thing is, if they just sit at home and drink, they'll be dead in 5 years.
So yeah, you're 100%,
You know, so
100%
there's a
right.
functionality between being active and the per se retirement mode, right? Not everybody
Yeah.
just has a house to sell and the retirement fund and everything set up at 7 years old and they're just gonna quit. Well, some just are doing it to survive and have something to live for.
Well, I mean,
Yeah, a lot of people want to do that, right? Like it's actually giving them purpose and joy. So, I mean, if you want to work into your 80s, absolutely you should be allowed to, and it should be encouraged if that's the thing that's going to make you happy. But if you've like kind of put off kind of what you want to do now for what you expect you'll be able to enjoy later, you might find you're fucked by the time you arrive at it, and that you actually just don't no longer have the capacity to
or
enjoy
you
it.
die early anyway, right? I mean, though that's what I'm getting at
Yeah.
here. It's like this idea. It's like, well, I've done my time, and now I get to retire. It's like, not really, right? Like the idea is that people used to retire because they, if you go back 100 years ago when it started coming out, it's like, yeah, you retired at 60 because you were broken and unable to perform any job anyway, and you were dead 5 years later, right? But now this person who's like, oh yeah, I retire at 65 and I live until I'm 85. I'm an active senior for 10 of that, and I'm doing. It's like, why don't you just keep working, right? What or find another thing to do, right? It's just like, oh, I went on cruises. Like, I don't get it. Like, it seems like such an empty existence, and to have
You know,
saved and squandered and everything else while you were young. It's like, I mean, a pound of morning is worth it more. I mean, an ounce of morning is worth more than a pound of afternoon. These same people say, but then at the same time, it's like, yeah, I mean, $20,000 when I'm in my 20s is worth more. And even if you throw away, inflation, all that stuff, I'm saying, $20,000 when you're in your 20s versus $200,000 when you're 70. You're gonna have a lot more fun
Yeah.
with that $20,000. So why save it in the, I mean, like, live it up while you got it, right? And otherwise, because I mean, yeah, you gotta. And the main thing too is that, yeah, some people say, well, for this something you're gonna die of cancer at 55 anyway, right? Well, now you're all fucked, right? You delayed all that stuff, so that's why you got to take what you can. Now you shouldn't be completely living in the moment. You should have some. It's like, what do I want in the next year, the next 5 years, or and then adjusting your plans accordingly. But yeah, some people are just like, oh, nope, nope. I'm just focusing on the prize there. 65.
I think that like coming from my perspective is a bit of like a farmer's vision, right? In that 9 out of 10 farmers also have a job in town of some sort. They're not just farmers; they're also a machinist or a mechanic or so they work till retirement age. They get to collect their pension, but then they continue to farm until they're fucking 90 years old, right? So they don't stop. They just get to do what they enjoy for on that aspect of it. And those old boys, I mean, they work. That's not fucking around, right? If they keep active, they'll live till they're 100. But I mean, the retirement, go on a cruise, sit on a beach. I absolutely agree with you there. Like them fuckers would be dead in no time, right? But like almost every farmer I know also has another job to help feed feed the beast, so to speak.
Exactly. You got to have more, whether you call it hobbies or whatever. Some hobbies are just kind of like point. I don't know. Like, yeah, like, I'm just gonna watch football today, guys. I'm just gonna watch football. Oh, there's another football game. Oh, there's another football game.
Yeah, it's all relative, right? I don't know. I mean, I got plenty of buddies that will spend inordinate portions of their time on what I think are just completely useless, dumb fuck tasks. But at least it has the outward appearance of making them happy. That's actually largely how I feel about having kids. I don't have any close, trusting relationships with people that have ever told me they have kids and it's the greatest thing I've ever done. And I genuinely believe them when they tell me. I don't think they're lying to me. I think a portion of them, a small one, albeit, is lying to themselves because it's like, well, what are you going to do if that's not the case? You're going to black dad them? I don't know. You're going to fuck off to get a pack of cigarettes? I suppose some people do it, but the other part is like it's true, you know, like the larger part of the story is that it's true for them. And then of course what from the outside looks like sacrifice is something they're happily engaging in because they see it as to the benefit of this thing now that they care about more than, you know, themselves. They're sitting on the beach time or football watching time, whatever it is. But like, I guess if you can figure out some happy medium, like, and this is just for myself talking, um, like I did put in a lot of time when I was younger with the idea that somehow getting me a right amount in the bank account would lead me to believe like, well, now I can stop with the bullshit and I can focus on what's really important. But the truth is like that, I mean, at least in my case, doesn't never really happen. It's like I still just really want to do whatever it is I want to do in that kind of moment. And anything that's like an 8-hour job getting in the way is something I'm willing to work to avoid doing. Um, and and for me, I'm not like I don't take handouts. I'm not interested in fucking the government assisting me in anything. I try to keep my income low enough that it's not desirable as a target for fucking taxes, but it's all above board. It's not like I have to launder drug proceeds or something. Although living this way, it's got its own set of challenges in that it seems to generate suspicion amongst my peers about, well, where is it coming from and how it's like it's actually not that hard. I'm just not a fucking idiot that feels like I have to have the newest and latest and greatest and all the things you seem to place a lot of value in and that I actually have very little interest in. So, you know, you can kind of get some of this shit done and remain true to your ideals, if you want to call it that, and make like not a lot of waves in the process. I don't feel like I'm wasting my life because I don't go to work for somebody. I feel like yeah, if I decided to uh, show up for a job, I could make more money, and then so what? I'd have more money to do less of the things I want to do.
That,
Does that make sense?
that's the quality of life ratio, right? Is that does your time put in bring you enough quality to justify your life? And I think that like Jordan Peterson hit on it, and not to trigger anybody in the room, you know, the trajectory. There's a lot of room for failure, but the idea is that when when you're on the right track, things will feel right, and then you're on the wrong track. You might have to take a step back and go, okay, well, wait, that's not my direction. Okay, maybe I'll try over here, right? But the thing is people get too far down the wrong path until they're in just a fucking black hole rather than take that one step back and being self-aware and then finding something that lights a fire in your belly, right? Find something that brings you joy, and then your quality of life, your time put in versus value come out is worth living. Just my 2 cents. I'm not.
No, that's good. That's good. Fucking them's is good words there, farm boy. There's no doubt, man. I don't know. I feel like if everybody's supposed to be working towards the same bullshit objective, a lot more people are going to arrive there or be on the process to arriving there and realizing that in fact, yeah, it's bullshit, and that's going to create issues, you know, in society like we're kind of seeing now with the younger generation feeling you know, more or less disenfranchised. Like, fuck this, I don't want that, and there seems to be no other course available. So I'll take the first lifeline thrown out, and in this instance, it's the government and stupid shit like UBI, and you know, um, kind of you trade off your freedoms and your liberties, meaning everyone has to, and we'll give you more quote unquote security, which I think is yeah reliably unreliable at this point.
See, and I think part of the problem is that people tend to think that somebody else can give you a shortcut or an answer, but at the end of the day, nobody but you can find your own fucking answer. So just because you see somebody in their own and they go, oh, fuck, I need to do that. Well, no, I spent, 35 years fucking shit up. and falling on my face, I found a spot where I have the right quality of life and time put in versus value coming out, and my value will be found in a different spot than yours. See, my answer isn't yours, right? And people seem to think there's a fucking dope chart for finding value in life. Well, there isn't. You to each their own, and there's no shortcut. There's no dope chart. You gotta fucking fail a little bit, find what feels wrong, find what feels right, and take the better of the paths, right? If you're not willing to fail, you're not gonna find what has value.
I definitely agree with that. It's like we were talking about that. I think I was actually in Zinc Space the other night, like about uh I want to die with no regrets. It's like no, that's exactly how I don't see it. I want to die filled with regrets, like at least as many times I could honestly say, oh, I deeply regret that decision, but I have the counterpoint of, but man, I fucking knocked it out of the park on that other one. Then, like, to me, just balance of probabilities, that would indicate you lived a pretty fucking full life. Each one of those quote unquote failures obviously is like that's education you can't pay for. That's not theory you can learn and apply. You have to actually live it to understand it and then know, yeah, but that fuck up led to five other really beneficial things, right?
Well, and the amount of
You just
times I've talked to somebody in person, get in an in-depth conversation, and they come to the conclusion that my answer is their answer. It's just like, well, fuck. I beat cancer and rebuilt my whole life twice and did this and did that and that. Like it was not a fucking smooth trajectory for me to get to the stable ground. My answer is not yours, right? If
yeah,
you're gonna have to fuck some shit up to get there, but did you learn when you fell on your face, or did you stick your finger back in the fucking socket? Really, like, no, you stop putting your finger in the socket. Okay, that
yeah,
didn't work. Right? Okay, let's do something else.
yeah, stick your dick in the socket. No, no, didn't like that one. Yeah, I mean, you're right, man. That's what it is. And I don't know, like the whole disenfranchisement thing that I'm seeing. It's not new to Gen Z. I know plenty of fucking millennials that were the same way, but it's kind of hard to explain like what Zink said about the 20 grand when you're 19 versus the 200 grand when you're 80. Like, so where I agree with the premise there because it's true and it makes perfect sense. If you somehow were able to explain to that 19-year-old, like, look, why don't you bank 15 of it in fucking, I don't know, Google stock and take the other five and go blow your brains out and be the king of the weekend. You could try it. Well, you might not do great of either, but you'd make a net result in both. Do you know what I mean? Like, you don't have to go fucking balls to the wall. But once you get into the system of, well, my friends are, they own this type of home now, or they have this many children, or they drive this type of car, and I'm by that measure, I'm doing great, I'm amazing, or like I'm a fucking abject failure. I find more often than not those comparisons are fucked to begin with. Like, um, I'm happy to live in a shitty apartment, but it's in a half a block to the ocean. Like I'm happy to live in a fucking city full of, communist, socialist, Marxist whining cunts. If it gives me access to the ski hills within, 25 minutes. Like there's trade-offs and I don't need to feel like within having understood I've made the trade-offs to establish the base point. I don't need to have a fucking $6 million home to feel like I'm um, I'm in the race for winning, whatever you want to define it as, or I have X amount of dollars in my bank account that puts me in the race for winning. And I think the long about point I'm trying to make is by convincing yourself that's the right path to be on, then you're more likely to embrace the shitty stuff we're seeing now, which is like the malicious mediocrity, the middle that are fucking, they don't want to do better for themselves, right? Like that's not even necessarily on their agenda. Oh, I need to earn more money, or I need to be more educated, or I need to da 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 live a better life. They just don't want you to have that. They look at you as like a representation of the things that are wrong in their life. And then you see them, this generational shit. People, oh, they blame the boomers. You ruined the world. And look, this is all you've left us. It's like really fucking prevalent and completely self-destructive. And then it just generates, even more problems for everybody around. So, yeah, I don't know, man. I'm like realizing, um, potentially anyway, that like where I put a lot of value on people before, I'm not so much now because they're just continuing to fucking demonstrate like this spiral we're in, and the people perpetuating it are one and the same thing, right?
I had an employer once to tell me something that it goes, when something triggers you and pisses you off, there's something about you that I don't like about me. It goes, there's something in that person that you feel you're falling short on that causes you to hate that person. It goes, if you instantly don't like somebody, pump the brakes and self-evaluate and figure out where you're falling short, because it's a self-reflection that you have a problem with. It's not always that person, right? And I taught myself when I had a hot temper early on in my life, that it was more often than not, say arguing with a family member, that if you mirror it and observe it a bit before you react, you could catch yourself as being an idiot. I mean, not everybody does that. They just get triggered and they fly off the handle and play a victim, right? But really, they're not happy with themselves, which causes trigger points everywhere.
Yeah, no, I think that's a fairly valid observation. I don't know. I've kind of learned over time that like and I still do it. I'm never not going to do it because it's like whatever. I wouldn't say it's an optimist versus realist thing. I wouldn't put it into that perspective necessarily, although I'm sure that plays into it. But I'd say like I'm happy to give people the benefit of the doubt, and then happy to talk myself out of the belief that, oh, you know what, they're proving that old fucking strategy wrong once again. Like this person is demonstrating they're, dishonest, or they're whatever it is. Like something's up. I don't like it. I'm still happy to try and convince myself, no, this is in you. You're probably seeing it like biased effectively, that I'm writing shit into the story that isn't here. So like take a step back from that. But even the key red flags, like to me the worst ones always seem the least innocuous to begin with. Like for an example, so like somebody who lies, right? And I mean everybody lies, but I'm talking about people that are fundamentally dishonest with themselves. They're fundamentally dishonest with other people. But chances are they've been doing that long enough that they know how they're telling on themselves, right? So then they take steps to kind of mitigate that. And then it becomes, oh, they're not just really good at lying, now they're really good at manipulating people.
Yeah,
And
but
then
Zinc hit
if
on the
that's
drug addicts, right? That they get very good at deceptions and avoiding the self reflection of all this compartmentalized shit that they got in the back for you, right?
well, yeah. And then I think also it's like if they don't take the original step back and say, yeah, you're right. I was lying. Like, my bad. It was a shitty thing to do. I just didn't want to get in trouble, or I didn't want to, disappoint you. Like, I'm talking kids with their parents that far back. If they don't take those steps early on and they get away with them later in life, then it rewards that. It perpetuates it even worse. And then all those other, shitty qualities get reinforced. And pretty soon they don't know the fucking difference between um, fact and fiction. So it's like by the time whatever you're in your 30s or something and you meet people like this, and again, depending on the context, how you meet them, where is it a work function, is it like a professional setting, is it just a friend of a friend, is it whoever, whatever, like if you're still walking around with the ideal that like, yeah, give everyone the benefit of the doubt, like you're almost setting yourself up at that point to fucking to kind of get suckered into whatever this fucking poisonous whirlpool
Well,
of a person
it
is.
comes in time, though, right? Like my point more or less being that you don't react on emotion. If you can see it ahead and act on it full ahead, then proceed. But if you get the trigger and you fly off the handle, then you're acting off emotion, not critical thinking. So as
Right.
long as you can react within reason and with a level head, it's when you hit the trigger points and want to fight. You're on the fight. You're not going to react within reason with proper brain thought. You're just a victim at that point, right?
Yeah.
But somebody who's like you said, like the 30-year-old person that has never been accountable, they will be a victim of everyone they meet their entire life because
Yep.
everything is an emotional reaction. As where if you fine tune that, you actually stop reacting to people, and you just have a calm, cool head. You don't have to, self balance so much because you can trust your gut. You've already been in check. The hard part is, correcting it off the hop and then refining it comes easier, right? Momentum's easy to keep, the hard to start.
Yeah,
No, I mean that's like most of the hard stuff, right?
yeah.
It's practice it over time. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was listening to you gentlemen speak. It kind of sounds like you're talking about emotional intelligence because a lot of what you said I find relatable in many regards. So, like, I listen to my gut more, though. Like, Farmer, you're saying that maybe listening to your gut's not a good idea. But personally, I think now that I'm 29, I didn't listen to my gut at 14 or at 21, but I do now. But one thing I've learned recently that has increased my emotional intelligence is 3 questions I ask myself now whenever I'm heated. I just learned this recently and I'm starting to do it. I'm going to implement it throughout my life in all areas where I ask myself 3 questions if I'm any kind of interaction with a friend, an acquaintance, a girl I'm dating, my boss, whatever. 3 things I'm ask myself in a moment. I'm not if it's gonna I become heated or there is a problem or an issue and I have to address it. I ask myself these 3 things before I go forward. I ask myself, does it need to be said? Does it need to be said by I or can it be said by someone else? And lastly, does it need to be said right now? And I'm telling you right now, Farm Boy, I've learned this recently, and I'm like, I think this is 3 great questions that I think I routinely ask myself. If I can nail at least 2 of those questions in any given moment when I'm in a heated debate or I have an issue and need to bring up a problem with someone that I interact with or I work with or I have some kind of relationship with, ask yourself that. Does it need to be said? Does it need to be said by you? Or and lastly, does it need to be said right now? If you ask yourself those 3 questions, I already started it. Maybe it's been just 2 weeks since I've learned this. I think it will be much easier to calm yourself down. And I would very much recommend using those questions because I do it myself and it's a really great help now.
Yeah, no, I mean it's just even if you wait, the whole idea being that moment of reflection before the reaction, right? That's the key point. Whatever it may be, to let your brain kick in rather than rather than your emotion. And it doesn't take much. Just pump the brakes, think about it for a second. But if you don't take that moment when then for reality to kick in, like I said, some people it's religion. Some people it's you bet I have a similar process, but in a different fashion. Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I
But
think
as
I mean,
the main key being giving yourself that first second And like you said, does this really have to be? Does this really have to happen right now? And more times than not, I bet you it doesn't. Right? It really doesn't.
I
If you
think
give it that moment, right?
if it was like if what you were saying, City Boy, was contextualized more to like say a professional setting, I think that like that would make a lot more sense in business speak. But if it's an interpersonal relationship and you're asking yourself the question of, does it need to be said? Does it need to be said right now? And does it need to be said by me? Then for a lot of people, not everybody obviously, but for a lot of people, you're just incentivizing yourself to basically perpetuate that problem because the answers are probably going to be like a combination of yes, no, no, yes, or no, yes, or no, no, no. And a lot of people, again, uh, this is just programming from birth, is like I'd rather avoid the conflict. Like I would rather not deal with the heated issue in the room because it's going to make it uncomfortable, unpleasant, whatever it is. So then most people kind of basically just push it off or they give up their power in that situation. So, I mean, typically if it's something that and it's not like a selfish angle, but if it's something I think matters to me personally, then I tend to address it right away and try not to be coming at it from an overly emotional standpoint. But I mean, like emotion doesn't necessarily hurt, especially if it's an important thing and it's involving an important person, then sometimes it's the best way to go about it is like, early and often and try and get a handle on it that way without losing your shit.
Well, it kind of reminds me of an old tale. The donkey and the tiger are arguing, and the donkey says the grass is blue, and the tiger goes, "No, no, no, it's not." And they go to the king of the jungle to resolve the issue, and the lion sends the tiger off for persecution. And before he leaves, he goes up, "What the hell? The grass isn't blue." He goes, "Yeah, but you're arguing with an ass. You're better than that." Yeah, you did not help yourself to have that argument. That is why you're being punished.
I like that. That's a
Yeah,
fun analogy.
I think what a lot of people. Sorry, I'm stepping in here, kind of halfway through. You guys fucking bothering you, but I feel like procrastination is part of the problem, and some of the problem is people don't want their feelings hurt. Like me, I'll go straight in. Like I get City Boy's point too. There's a time and place for that as well, right? But I go straight in, and there'll be times where I'm going straight in for like the kill, whatever. I'm probably gonna get hurt by the answer, but I'm not fucking dwelling on shit. So whether I'm getting hurt or I'm not getting hurt, I'm going in. I'm ending whatever. Like I gotta go in and like Farm Boy says, take that second. But you can't just say, yeah, you know what I mean? Like one,
Yeah,
you're only hurting yourself.
this is more from like the managerial dealing with people perspective, right? In that say I help run a company with 8 different people working underneath me, and many of us were older than me. There was some arguments that I just did not have to have. Did I gain value by having that argument in front of the whole staff? No, no, I don't. That's not the time for that. I'm not up to me to argue with the donkey. You can take that one aside later and deal with it accordingly with the right emotion and with all emotion, period. And on that perspective, and I think in groupthink, it's important to check that in how you're observed in, say, arguing with the ass.
Yeah, and City Boy, you are seriously like you're well beyond your years, really. Seriously, like I said this to you before, you have tons of good points. You're a smart fella. Uh, you know, I'm not knocking you. I like a lot, well, mostly everything you say. Right? You got good points. You're smart, dude.
Thank you, Tiki Bar. But I agree though. What you said also is that sometimes you need to address something right away, right? That 100%. I could tell you firsthand. I very much agree with that. Certain things you just cannot let it slide, and you have to act on instinct, right? So definitely, there's those moments you will have to listen to your gut and just go with your gut. There's no thinking through, just action. Yeah.
Really, I think that, like, usually argument, not so much arguments, but thinking back to, we did a lot of street fighting growing up, and thinking later in life. But I did pretty good, like I come out pretty well. But at the end of the day, you thinking back, none of them had to happen. Like, it was a way out with everyone if you thought with a clear head. But young guy acting on dick measuring, second acting on emotion. That was how it ended. It was with fisticuffs, right? Self-reflecting later in life, hindsight's 2020. I could find a good resolution, or have walked away from from several of those, and have been a better person at the end of the day, right?
Yeah. This might hang with Zinc more than most, but I heard him talking about something recently where it's like there's the good old days, right? When you could kind of get into a fist fight in the neighborhood or at school or even like anyway, within a certain group, you're in your group, they're in their group, shit could go off and it could be a fight that's, resolved by whoever wins, loses, it's over. And then the new version of that is that those types of things are no longer really reliably a good source of resolving conflict because even if you win, you may lose in terms of whatever you called the guy a faggot before you hit him, and then when he fell and you know swelled his brain and died a few weeks later in hospital. Now it's not just manslaughter or a mistaken murder; it's also a hate crime, and you're gonna get the fucking rest of your life in jail for it. But my kind of evolved take on this is basically like the assumption that the person I'm dealing with, especially if it's the situation, however it's rolled out, it's gotten bad enough that it's about to become violent. That tells me more likely than not the person that I'm dealing with is a fucking retard. So there's absolutely no benefit or acceptable level of risk in engaging with it without ensuring there's a defined outcome. And I would say, short of getting them to threaten my life first, then there's really no sense in getting into that kind of confrontation without actually killing the person. Um, because it just, I know this sounds a little fucked up. It's a justification for killing somebody, but for an example, if somebody said 20 years ago to me, like in the course of an argument or whatever, some type of ongoing dispute, like, oh fuck, I could kill you or I'm gonna kill you. I don't think then I would have ever seriously considered the notion that, oh yeah, this person might actually kill me, or they might not have the ability to stop themselves. Um, and now that would actually be the first thought I would have as an adult, 30 plus years past schoolyard fights, that I've seen enough shit happen intentionally or unintentionally or seemingly unintentionally, where I'm like, I would never put that kind of faith or trust in a retard that was looking to solve a confrontation with violence anyway. So my natural outcome would actually be to kill that person. And I mean, if it came down to a situation where it is going to be you versus them, and I don't mean that like in the old kind of self-defense way. I mean that in the like new realities way, where you cannot trust a motherfucker to act like a human being, then you should actually anticipate that they're going to act like an animal, in which case then it really is like, yep, it may not even seem like it, but that is a situation where it's you versus them. Then yeah, I think probably the best outcome would be to kill them. And that's fucked up, obviously, but and it's also a pretty powerful incentive not to get involved in a situation like that. But being put into one, like without your participation, your consent to it, then I think the natural thing today would actually be to end them.
Yeah, well, you wouldn't want to injure somebody nowadays. That's for damn true. So if you, I mean, part of it is not wander in the wrong end of town and be a jackass, right? And end up in that situation. But if you are in that situation, you're definitely not better off hurting them versus killing them, because then you're basically end up in prison at this point, right? I think self-awareness goes a long ways, right? You people look around the room and you can feel the energy, right? And a lot of times you know when you're in a bad situation. You should know, right?
Well,
Yeah. I don't know. I think part of it is a cultural thing, part of it is a societal thing, and the rest of it is just become generational.
Well, I'm
Like
sure
I don't.
there's certain pubs in Vancouver that you just know that you don't fuck with, right? That you just don't even
Yeah.
walk into. And then there's the middle of the road, belly up and have a beer and you're safe to shoot the shit kind of pub. And
Well,
then,
even then, I would say, like, for an example, if you're not like a mouthy piece of shit, or you're not walking into every bar assessing it like a fucking situation where I may have to kill people. Like I know people who like to think of themselves like that, and then they project that image into a place where there might actually be a couple of genuine killers. That's not even a person I want to be at a table drinking with, even if they are behaving themselves. That's not a person I'd really want to be around at all, because it's a natural attractant for shit. But my personal take would be, like, if I was going out with a reliable buddy of mine that I know their nature when they're sober or drunk, I would rather take them to for drinks at the Ivanhoe than I would in Yaletown. And I mean, I know that sounds fucked up, but like like the people in one place are less likely to fuck with you, because the assumption is if you're in here, you're of the same mind, right? Short of like a complete head case, that would be the established norm. Whereas if you're in like the, trendy fucking retard bar, there's just a whole host of people in there looking to fuck with people, period. And then particularly looking to fuck with people that they seem to think or they perceive to have an advantage over, which again kind of takes me back to, like, if like back in the day, there might be certain bars you go into where there's going to be fights, right? But it's going to be like, typically it's going to be fights between people who want to fight, right? And therefore there's like some, whatever you want to call it, unwritten rules that they're both going to abide by. And if they can't be relied to do on that, then there's other people around that are going to enforce it. And no one's going to end up dead. And very often no one's going to end up stabbed or mortally wounded. And almost certainly no one's going to end up having to give an interview to the police afterwards. Whereas if you go into that place now in the nice, quote unquote, nicer part of town with quote unquote nicer type of people, and something does go off, these people are so fucked in their head to begin with. They're so programmed insecure. They have so much fucking ego tripping around them. They've got their boys at the table, and these guys are all, working out, looking right, wearing the right types of chains and clothing. But every single one of them's carrying a knife or a gun. Like, shit goes off so fast. It's like, even if I tried to do or thought to do the right thing by giving you that consideration, I might actually be ensuring that I go from either being seriously wounded or dead. Whereas, what you would or should be able to expect is, yeah, worst case, you mouth off to the wrong person, you're going to get punched in the face. No big deal. You go home and cry in the shower. But now it's more like, yeah, no, I've somehow insulted somebody by not giving a fuck about who they think their version of them is, and not caring, maybe even mocking it if it's my case. And now, they in their fucked up set of circumstances and reality feel justified to kill me. Then I'm like, dude, we're never even gonna get to that. It's not gonna be, well, like, let me take off my glasses. It's gonna be, here's a screwdriver going through the center of your chest. Like, that's And I don't think that's actually wrong.
That's an
I mean, I know it would be
interesting perspective because you kind of making yourself the minority in that position versus being part of the crowd in the rougher crowd. I didn't think of that from that maybe standpoint, right? But coming from a guy that say walks into a bar with a cowboy hat, I basically would have a target on my back in almost every bar I would walk into. Right? You're if you're the only guy with a cowboy hat, yeah, you might get in a fight. There's good odds. Like it's just like that's part of the odds of I wear a ball cap. If I really don't want to fight, I wear a fucking ball cap, right? It's like
Yeah, I was gonna
and
say
yeah.
the exact same
Well,
thing, far boy, and to you, Leaf. Like I'm 6'4", 200 pounds, right? People think they have to prove themselves, right? I have no problem. I'm 50. I still have no problem fighting, and I ain't going to the bar looking for a fight. But they gotta prove themselves to their buddy. Hey, look at that guy over there. He's big. If they take me down, then their buds are all like, "Fuck, he's the one," or whatever, right? A lot of times
yeah.
don't happen for them like that, but they give her a try, right? So, and listen, I've got my ass kicked lots too, but I feel like people do this to try and what's the word? Like you guys are smarter. There's a word like
Their own ego.
yeah,
Yeah, it's
yeah,
for their own
yeah,
ego.
yeah, exactly, right?
I've seen that a lot. I got a lot of big buddies that I particularly like to fuck around with because I know like because they're big dudes, it's like big dogs. They're always fucking more chill and they're less inclined to get into serious confrontation because the stakes are way higher. So I, like lovingly have a bit of fun with that, but there's clearly lines you don't cross with people, and yet when we go out, it's never me, the guy fucking nonstop talking and trying to keep it entertaining and lively. It's never me they're coming over to start fights with. It's always the biggest fucker at the table, and I feel bad for that.
you,
Like, because it's like you're a target without being a
yeah,
target, and you're the last guy who'd want to be a target, and yet here you are.
you kind
And
of
as far as the cowboy hat goes,
live life with
I was
that,
just gonna.
yeah, with that target, and then you just get to a point of self awareness and like. When I walk into a bar, I take a look around, look at, okay, well, that guy I probably want to go, that guy I might want to go. You just take a mental note, and then later on in the night, that's probably the guy that might suffer you. Right? It's just something
Yeah.
like just a
Yeah.
self awareness
I'm
that you.
limited. My old lady laughs at me because I'm limited at where I will never sit with my back to the crowd. I always have my back against the wall and always scanning. And she's like, "Why are you?" Finally, like fucking 7 years together, she's like, "Why do you always do that?" So I had to explain to her, like, "Fuck, I got to survey the situation here."
Michael Corleone, like the ultimate mobster move. Never never sit with your back to the door. I was gonna say about Farm Boy, like when you're walking into the bar and you're the only guy in there wearing a cowboy hat. When I see that guy, I oftentimes think to myself, I bet you there's a guy it'd be interesting to have a couple of shots at the fucking bar with, because it's like the ball's on this dude, right? Clearly not interested in like whatever. This is a Mexican pantalones dance bar. How dare you wear a cowboy hat in here? I'm like, you know, provided the guy's not wearing an electric blue fucking LED lit cowboy hat and assless chaps with fucking, tassels coming off his jacket. I'm thinking, there's dude who's just comfortable in his own skin. Like those are the people that generally when they're filled with alcohol are like a slightly more amplified version of their general cool selves. It's the guy coming in wearing the fucking like, he's drenched in women's perfume and glittering with gold, and wearing the tight fitting t-shirt with all the right angles on it, kind of flexing and peacock and all this. I'm like, that guy's gonna be a fucking problem. Like 5 drinks from now, that guy and his whole table are gonna be a fucking problem. And it's like not the kind of problem you used to be able to deal with. Now it's the kind of like stab bang bang problem I don't want to be around,
Exactly.
even if I don't intend.
Exactly.
You
And
know,
what sparks it off is that usually, I'm 6'2", like fairly, well built individual. Good enough that if I put on my, going out pose, I'm you walk with confidence into a place. I don't walk with my tail between my legs. Women respond to that. If you're the only cowboy in the bar, that rubs all the dudes in the bar the wrong way. All of them. Like that's what women is what gets it going. 9 times out of 10, a girl comes up, chats with you, somebody's butt hurt, and then shit goes south. It's just like that tends to be, if you pair yourself with confidence, you get that reaction, and in turn you piss dudes off. It's just how it goes.
Well, it's the, what do you call it? Malicious mediocrity all over again, right? Like when people, if you look them in the eyes when you talk to them, or you don't walk slouched looking at the ground, they're thinking, "Oh, look, this fucking guy, what an arrogant cunt," or he thinks his shit don't stink, or whatever. It's like, yeah, I guess. I mean, that is actually what you said before. It's just the thing you're fucking bitching about in that person is the thing you're most insecure about in yourself. But the problem is we just live in a world now packed to the fucking rafters with insecure people, and then they go to no ends to avoid dealing with their own shit and instead just putting it on everyone else. And yeah, I mean, like, I like, I don't like, I'm comfortable with confrontation. I very rarely like or will take advantage of a situation that's going to involve violence, just because I've literally seen it like just too much, and it's never, even when you win, you lose. That's been my experience with it since I was a kid. It's gotten worse as an adult, and the outcomes now seem to be so fucking like heavily unfavorable to it. My first instinct is usually to avoid it, but there are situations where you can't, and usually those situations are being created by people like that, people that are just, "Oh, this fucking guy, who does he think he is?" Or "This girl I think is hot is talking to that guy. I'm gonna go over and settle the debt." It's like they're not even aware of the basics. Like, you know what I
No,
mean? You
exactly.
look like a
It's
beta,
only out of
you're
spite.
acting like one. It's just fucked. Yeah, it's the malicious mediocrity. And I mean, it's kind of supported, right? Like, I mean, if everybody's acting a certain way, then most people come to the decision, even if they don't have to like verbalize it or even be fully consciously aware of it, they're like, this is just the way it is, though. So technically, you know, yeah, you were offensive in the way that you walked in here without really saying anything, and acting in a manner that made you appear to be better than them. Therefore, I kind of see where they're coming from, and it's like, seriously, like that's what you had to add? You're that fucked up? You can't do your own thinking, reasoning, rationale? You're just like, well, 9 out of the other 10 people in this room seem to be of one opinion, and even if I think there might be some problems with that, I'm more willing to agree than I am willing to stand up and talk shit to 9 other people.
Well,
So
and
we're
really, what did I do? I put on a fucking plaid button-up shirt, threw on a hat and a pair of jeans, and went out for a fucking beer. It wasn't like I,
yeah,
drew a goddamn target on my back or was wearing blank.
right.
Fucking told everybody to fuck off. I'm more than happy to have a beer with anybody in there, but how
Right.
how confrontational is a button-up plaid shirt? Like fucking give it
Do you
a
think that's just it? Do you think it's because you didn't walk in there draped in a trans rights flag with your assless chaps on and your fucking stereo booming, "It's Raining Men"? Do you think that might be the
Leaf
reason
is
that
just
it's
describing his typical outfit when he goes in, so that's why he's curious.
I mean, that's my Sunday Funday
I mean, that's
outfit,
also when
but
you go to visit grandma too, right?
He is way too
it's
fucking
true.
specific with these outfits. He has them all.
I mean, I have variations, combinations of them all, but that's just how I like to express myself out in the wild. But it's kind of funny, right? It's like, if you have a Canada flag now, what are you? You're a racist. If you have a US flag, what are you? You're MAGA. Like, they've literally done polls on this, I mean, they're TikTok polls, mind you, so I don't know how much you want to believe them. But they're like, well, would you say that if somebody has an American flag on their clothing or displayed on their vehicle or hanging out front of their home, would you agree or disagree that this person is most likely, and it's like, right wing, racist, white, and yeah, overwhelmingly, unsurprisingly, the answer is now yes. So this psyop worked, right? Now we're dealing with the consequences of it.
Well, Leaf, you mentioned malicious mediocrity. I like that term. But like, I listen to all you gentlemen speak. All of you are 6 footers, okay? I hear your stories, but imagine you're someone who stands under 5'9" and is confident, masculine, and stoic, and you go into a room full of other males and you will just be yourself at the get together. Do you have any idea what it's like? Like how many times dudes I don't know are trying to go out of their way to irritate me, to upset me, to like try to like cut me down in size, or feel upset when I'm talking to a nice girl at the bar? Like, do you guys have any idea what it's like to be a dude who's in shorter stature, who's confident? Like you guys talk about your stories, I'm like, no, man, life's a lot harder when you're a shorter male and you're confident. And you see a girl and you want
Yeah.
to talk to her. You don't care if you get rejected. You like her and she made eye contact with you. So you're gonna go over and talk to her. She rejects you. It's all good. You're enjoying yourself. You know what happens to the men around you in the vicinity and how they treat you in that situation? They're not pleasant.
Yeah. No, you're preaching to the choir,
Yeah.
man. I'm 5'9", and I get fucking big ass beta males picking shit with me all the time. I'd recommend either get strapped or develop that piercing 1,000 yard. You might get me now, but later when you're pissing at the urinal, I'm gonna fucking leave you in at the top of the toilet tank.
No, Leave. Like, no, man, like, I've been doing this my whole life. Since I was 18, now I'm 29, I understood what's going on. Like, when it happened, I was younger, dude, I didn't know that this guy is just trying to, like, he's trying to, like, get one up on me because he feels insecure in my presence. I didn't know when I was 21, 18, 14, 16. I do at 29. So I'm just saying, though, it's a constant thing. But however, sometimes it works out where you can be in that situation, you make a friend. So I was in a situation where exactly like I described. I'm being myself. It's a Freedom Convoy event at a bar that's local, that is local bar in Ottawa. The owners of the bar and the restaurant are friendly with Freedom Convoy people. So we've been going there for years. We'll meet up at this particular bar, which is in downtown Ottawa. And so I was in a situation like that. I went to the bar later on the night. That was like last weekend. And all the dudes were kind of like being scunholes to me. Like they just feel some type of way because I'm confident. But then I made a friend, or a brand new friend, Jacob, who a brother from another mother. Because of him, we didn't even say any words. We just used like eye signals and like face glances, and he helped me get her number. The girl that I liked, who I was talking to all the evening, he helped me get her number. So shout out, even though all the dudes were being dicks to me, shout out to Jacob, and he was a true friend that like because of him, I was able to get her number. I was like, all right, I need to see you again. I just need her number. I need you to help me, isolate her, and then I can get her number before my Uber gets here. So it happens, but sometimes you'll meet like this one dude who's like, yo, I'm not gonna be a dick to you, and I see what you're trying to do, so I'll help you out. So sometimes it can be good, but generally they're all dicks. Most other people are men or dicks, just cowardly assholes. That's what I'd say. Most.
Oh yeah,
Most.
Yeah.
take the hype for granted. I can respect that. There's a perspective that I don't really get. You take the hype for granted, I guess, eh?
Pardon?
Yeah, no, it works both ways because I know lots of little dudes that they have a pit bull mentality and it can be a lot, but
Well, no, it's not. It's not a
generally,
pit bull mentality, man. It's just like it's the like I'm gonna be myself. If you the way I look at it, Leaf, it's like if when I meet and encounter someone and they don't like that I'm confident or outspoken or I walk a certain way, dress in a certain way, that's fine. You don't like me, but I'll dictate the terms how you don't like me. You don't get to call the shots on that. I get you don't like me,
fair
that's cool,
enough.
and that's fine. I'm
No,
gonna be myself, and I'll let you know how this is gonna go, how you're not gonna like me, why you're not gonna like me. I call the shots because I've learned now at 29, they're not gonna like me either way, dude. Okay, and I'm not gonna be a weirdo
yeah,
trying to be
no,
something I'm not. Okay, so
you're not wrong,
okay,
man. You literally gotta be yourself.
exactly.
That's actually the
And I
thing.
got her
That's the
number,
thing
Leaf.
that's
I got her
getting
number,
you.
by the way, dude. Even though they're all dicks,
Exactly.
I got her number. The attractive Freedom Convoy chick that I chatted with all evening. I secured her number and I texted her right away on the Uber ride home to let her know I want to see her again. So I'm just saying, though.
Yeah, I
I
mean
got it.
that's probably why though. That's like the thing you're explaining where it's your self-confidence. It's not arrogance. It gets it triggers lesser men's soft ass little egos. But the thing is, it does tend to pierce through the bullshit with particularly like real women that know they've made the same mistake enough times to realize, like they tend to gravitate towards that, right? And then the ball's back in your court, and you can go over and try and scumbag her with a one liner, be genuine, and probably win some ground. So yeah, all of those dynamics though, they make you a target for sure. You're just as bad as like the big soft-spoken nice guy who just goes out to the bar to have a drink and he looks a little different or he sticks out because of his size. You're in the same fucking boat as that guy now, but you don't have the like they may have the advantage where like well, one, they can use their size, or two, they can kind of give this some jumped up idiot a second thought, like, are you sure you want to do this? Like, I shit bigger than you. Sometimes that's enough to diffuse a situation, but you don't have that
No,
fucking
I
tool
don't,
in your
leave. I
box,
don't.
no
I don't
matter.
have that. I wish I did, man. I would just use it. I'm
Yeah.
like, yo, leave me alone, and like and then just leave me alone, and just let me be. Like, I wish I could use that line, but
What
yeah.
kind of girl
Well,
are you
and what
guys looking for? That's the biggest question. If you want a real girl, you have to act real, because a real girl is going to be able to look right through your fake facade that you have, the front that you show. If you're trying to,
Tracy, we're not talking about girls. We're talking about other men. Like,
this
I'm
I
not.
guy,
heard
This
you
has
this
nothing to do
talking
with
guy,
about a
girls. I'm saying.
girl.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I got her number. A girl that I met, and yeah, obviously she saw
We
through
just want the
the
girl
dude.
that will piss off the other dudes. That's the entire
yeah,
point of
yeah,
this.
that's the whole point.
Oh, that's what
The,
you guys are after.
the
All
girl
right,
that all the guys are
whatever.
staring at, waiting for their
Fine, I'll
opportunity
go
that
back to
night.
Toon Blast. You guys keep jerking each other off then.
No,
I'm
that's the thing though.
Whoa,
Is that,
Tracy, wait, where you going?
but them
I was
guys,
gonna say,
they sat and watched and thought about getting her number all night, and then you waltz in there and chat her up, and that offends people because they didn't have the nutsap to walk up to them, and I mean
Yeah,
that's what's unfair.
exactly, farm boy.
I mean, I
Yeah.
I have an actual specific answer to Tracy's question about the kind of woman I'm looking for, and it's Zink's mom, and he's really fucking getting in the way of this process. He's stonewalling me. He's talking shit about me to her. He's not trying to support me like a brother. He's not trying to,
Zinc, you
lift me up.
guide the dick.
He's
You
trying
don't
to
cock
pull
block.
me
You
down.
No,
guide,
but he only
guide.
wants
Don't.
my mom because he wants me, my little Aeromenos. He's just trying to do it no homo, but what he really wants.
I do. I want to be like the stepfather, the type you come across on Pornhub. That's the kind of stepfather eventually I want our relationship to gravitate towards. But I need to ease you into it. So just just come over for dinner, Zink. Just come over for dinner with me and your mom. Let's work on this family. Let's get us back together as a family again. That's all I'm asking.
So, speaking of which, my dinner is almost finished. So, any final thoughts on the story?
There's a good but, Zink.
It was an interesting read. You got me interested in Lovecraft now. So I don't think I ever read Cthulhu, but that'd be the next one. I think he said he wrote after that and started his fandom from
It
there.
definitely continues some of the theme because you're dealing. That one also has some swarthy foreigners and whatnot, right? But it's probably the most famous one of his. Yeah, probably that's the next one I'd say to go on to from here.
One thing I liked about this one that you had 6 different people read the same book, and I think every one of us got a different take off of the story, right? It was I hadn't been part of a book club or a group before, and to hear all the different excerpts everybody had, this goes to show you everybody looks at it differently, hey?
Oh, that's what makes this more entertaining than talking about the stupid headlines.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea, man. Come up with the next one. I'm happy to. I started reading Strangers in a Strange Land again this weekend, and I'm gonna go through that pretty quick, I think. But it might be a bit much for like I don't mean the content or whatever. I just mean the size of the
Yeah, we've done
book.
some lengthier ones in the past. I mean, maybe we'll just do Call of Cthulhu there, just kind of whatever there, because that's all. It's also relatively short. Most of Lovecraft's stuff is short. None of it's ever more than 100 pages or so. But
Is that the next one you're doing, or were you gonna do Starship Troopers?
I should schedule it out. Like, here's the difficulties. Yeah, trying to get everybody to read at the same time. If you guys are all reading, I mean, if you want to know what I'm reading right now, yeah, I just finished Starship Troopers. I'm working on Stranger in a Strange Land. I was reading Silence. I have to get back to that one. It's a Japanese one I was reading before I got sick. I get it back to it.
That one.
You you bookmarked that, or I bookmarked that Vonnegut short story you threw up. I know he's got quite a few, like about the same length as that Lovecraft one they're pretty good. I mean, there's a lot of meat in there for 50, 60-year-old literature.
Yeah, no, the Harrison Berger on one that one's good because yeah, it's more of a satire, but it's entirely what we're living now. We're close to there. Originally, like yeah, when I'd started this, I read Kafka. Right, there's a lot of legal circle jerking going on in these spaces. Like, guys, we just got to use the magical words, and that will be, that's not my real person. That's my sovereign because it's all in caps. And then the judge is like, "Oh my God, you got me, checkmate, buddy. You're free to go." Right, like that's how people think these things are. It's like, well, you got to invoke the no, no, no. It's and back to that point, right? That's why I think I mentioned this the other night, like doing Alice in Wonderland, because what I think about with this is the courtroom procedure from Alice in Wonderland. Really, there are some rare cases where somebody has gotten away with that sovereign citizen shit in some courtroom because the judge was in the mood for it. It's like, fuck it, buddy, it's fun, right? But another judge is like, fuck you, suck my dick. I'm gonna send you to the ass raping prison, right? Just because I'm in a bad mood. My wife's a whore. My son's a
But
faggot.
more often than not, they look at it now as like an excuse to fucking really flex their judicial muscles. Oh, you thought you were coming in here to talk your way out of a parking ticket because you're a sovereign citizen, and now you're doing fucking 3 years hard labor with fucking Big Mo and the
Yeah, well,
lads.
and
It's
so
not.
that was why I originally started this because, funny enough, everybody catches up with me on this. Here's the thing, and nobody will ever tell you this. All those spaces, during the convoy, everybody's like, "Oh, they're violating their oath of office," and I walk in and I'm like, "Well, there is no oath of office. There's only an oath of allegiance in Canada." And I'm not going to name names, but let's say nobody else on Spaces who was on at that time was saying this. Now they're all saying it. So sadly, guys, whatever you think of me, if you're lucky, you'll be where I am in a year or so.
Where you hate everybody and you
Absolutely.
don't discriminate.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I've been there a long time.
And that's the
I try
greatest
and
form
do
of
daily
happiness
battle.
that I've found, right? The more you hate, the happier you are, right?
It's your inner fount of joy is just dipping off that never-ending, cascading fountain of
It's like
hate.
taking a shit, right? You can't stop pooping, so you might as well just really just, squeeze it out.
Lean into it. Enjoy each curling tendril.
Bear down on it.
Actually,
Don't fight it. Bear down.
I was gonna say that one of the things I really enjoyed reading this was like it's obviously a lost fucking art, but the verbiage, like it's the words they're using, even though a lot of them are old, they don't necessarily come off like it doesn't date the language because there really isn't a lot. There's basically no dialogue, but the verbiage is just fucking. The only way I can describe it, and it's not doing any justice to the verbiage itself. It's like whorish, like it's just got such powerful words in there. So I fucking definitely enjoyed that aspect of it as
Well,
well.
that's part of his style. I mean, that was anachronistic. Even when right, he likes to do that. Right, he was like I said, yeah, he was a bit of an Anglophile, so he'll spell things in weird words. He likes to use the word fetid and feeder and stuff like that. He likes to spell it like in the British style and all that. Like he has another famous story called "A Color Out of Space," and it's spelled with a U. And you got to remember he's an American, so he liked to do stuff like that. So he's got a very particular style. They just start to later on you'll get to Cyclopean architecture, Cyclopean. So yeah, like he liked to really kind of grab onto some of those. But yeah, no, I mean, oh, he's got a few different ones. The Whisper in the Darkness is another one I like. Color Out of Space is a good short one too. Call of Cthulhu is probably just the next one because that's the classic one. That's the one. Even the dumb shits who don't read jack shit, that's just the ones they know. So you got to do that one. It's not bad. It's not bad. Like I just don't think it's his best. I think in some ways I like this one a little bit more than Call of Cthulhu. It's maybe tighter in some ways and it has a more intricate narrative style. And then, of course, what we didn't touch on here. Sometimes we touch on that when Carlo comes in, right? Because his background is literature, is the style here, right? Sometimes, like in Lovecraft, he'll have more intertextuality. Not so much in this one, but you'll see that in Call of Cthulhu. You'll understand what I mean by it when I say it. But yeah, Otherwise, I mean, yeah. At some point, we should probably do Starship Troopers. But the one I want to find somebody who's actually been through the military to do Starship Troopers. I'm curious what their perspective on it is, because that's kind of what it focuses on a lot there. Actually, I see Al Patriot down there right now. I don't know if he's ever read Starship Troopers, or I think he's been in the military. I can't remember who hasn't. But yeah, that'd be kind of my more interested one. Is just to see how somebody who's been through the military perceives Starship Troopers.
Well, I think Tracy's been through the military, but I don't know that she ever served.
That was really hurtful, Leaf, and I don't appreciate it.
Sorry, Tracy. I beg your apologies.
Now, let's be clear. She's been through the Canadian Forces, but I wouldn't call that a military anymore.
Wow.
Yeah,
she must
right.
have service. She might not have served, but she service.
There's
Yeah.
really only like 4 of them left anymore, so it's not that many guys.
Just because y'all get a hard on when I come in the room doesn't mean that I've serviced y'all, okay?
Go
Well,
ahead,
yeah, but
Al,
you're the
just
one with the
jump in
fat
there.
ass in the military. Of course you service. I don't. I mean, how that not
You're
happen?
about the only one that's allowed to say that anymore, City Boy, because you're the only one that's still nice to me.
Of course.
Go ahead, Al.
I have not read Starship Troopers. I saw the movie though, so I'm no use to you. Sorry.
Oh, Owl will speak to me too. So Owl, you can talk to
But
me.
yeah, so I mean, just on that, but yeah, so maybe we'll do that one at some point.
Fine, whatever.
If you guys go and look at the hashtag, you can also see the ones we've done in the past. We can always redo ones. The 2 best ones, like I always said, that we've done recently, I always mention Canticle for Leibowitz and The Diamond Age. I think those are the 2 that, like, yeah, I'd easily have no problem rereading. So yeah, well, and then there's one that I have a particular fondness for. It's strange and it's much more kind of fantasy, but it's brilliant. Like it's the Kugels. It's the Kugels. But yeah, so I'll toss those out to you guys. But yeah, I guess go explore some Lovecraft. It's all relatively short, and then I'll schedule the next one out.
Sounds good.
Perfect. Well, everybody have a lovely evening. And I'll probably be in some space later, but I'm sure you all will be too. So have a good one, guys.
Yeah. See you soon.
Later on.